Teresa Bennett placed a $5 bill on the polished conference table and watched Carolyn slide it toward the attorney without touching her hand. "There," Carolyn said. "That makes it a purchase." The attorney glanced at the bill, then at Gary. Gary gave a short nod. He was sitting across from Teresa with one ankle bouncing beneath his chair. He'd been doing that for most of the meeting. The office was on the second floor of a converted brick house in Claremont, New Hampshire. Through the window behind Carolyn, Teresa could see the top of a pharmacy sign and a row of parked cars wet from morning rain. Ronald had been buried 9 days earlier. His navy overcoat was still hanging beside Teresa's front door, though the front door was no longer going to be hers. The family trust owned the house. That was the phrase Carolyn had used twice. The family trust also held the investment accounts, the larger savings account, and the bonds Ronald had inherited from his father. Carolyn and Gary controlled the trust together. Teresa had known Ronald kept family assets separate. She hadn't known nearly everything they used was considered a family asset. The attorney, Philip Crane, turned the $5 bill so it faced the same direction as the papers. "This is adequate consideration," he said. "Once everyone signs, Maple House will be conveyed to Mrs. Bennett, along with the contents remaining on the property." Teresa looked down at the deed again. Maple House stood on Maple Street, less than 2 miles from the office. It had once been a boarding house. Ronald had bought it years before, though Teresa had never understood why. He paid the taxes, arranged basic insurance while he could still get it, and drove past the place whenever they came through town. Sometimes he stopped at the curb and stared at it. "It has good bones," he'd told her once. The city did not agree. A red notice on the front door declared the building unsafe for occupancy. Part of the rear roof had failed. 2 porches were pulling away, and the wiring was old enough that no electrician would reconnect power without an inspection. The latest report gave the owner 90 days to stabilize the structure or face demolition proceedings. Carolyn had brought photographs. In every one, Maple House looked wet, crooked, and tired. "We're trying to give you something outright," she said. "No trust conditions, no shared control." Teresa lifted her eyes. "You're giving me the demolition bill." Carolyn pressed her lips together. She was 49 and carried herself as if every room had a dress code. Her black jacket was simple but expensive. Even at her father's funeral, she had noticed when one of the flower arrangements arrived without a card. "That's unfair," she said. "The land has some value, after the building is removed," Gary added. He was 45, broad through the shoulders, and had Ronald's habit of rubbing his thumb across the side of his index finger when money was being discussed. Teresa had seen him do it while buying a car, disputing a restaurant charge, and asking Ronald for help with a loan. "How much will removal cost?" Teresa asked. Gary stopped rubbing his finger. "It depends." "On what?" "Hazardous material, access, disposal fees." "So, you've checked?" Carolyn leaned forward. "Of course we checked. We've been trying to settle the estate responsibly." The words settled between them. Teresa had spent 3 weeks caring for Ronald at home before an infection sent him back to the hospital. She had measured his medicine, changed his sheets, called the night nurse, and learned how to sleep in a chair without moving her injured shoulder. Carolyn had visited twice. Gary had visited once and spent most of that afternoon in the hallway on his phone. They had still been Ronald's children. Teresa had never tried to make that smaller. She had called them both when his breathing changed. She had stood back so they could reach his bed. Now they were settling the estate responsibly. Philip Crane pushed a second paper toward her. "Mrs. Bennett, you don't have to sign today." Carolyn turned to him. "We discussed the deadline." "I'm aware." Teresa read the page. In exchange for Maple House and everything left inside, she would release any claim against assets held by the Bennett family trust. Her personal belongings from the house would be made available for collection. She would have 30 days to remove them. "Made available," she said. "Am I allowed to use my key?" Carolyn looked briefly annoyed. "The locks were changed for insurance reasons. 9 days after Ronald died, we had to secure the property. I was living there. You were staying there," Carolyn said, and immediately seemed to wish she had chosen different words. Gary looked at the table. Teresa did not answer. She reached for the water glass beside her folder, but her right hand shook slightly. She changed hands before lifting it. The old injury in her shoulder had been burning since dawn. She had slept on a friend's fold-out couch, packed her clothes into 2 suitcases, and arrived wearing the same shoes she'd worn to the funeral because her other good pair was still inside the house. Carolyn noticed the change of hands. For 1 second, concern crossed her face. Then she looked back at the deed. "We'll pack anything that's clearly yours," she said. "Clothes, photographs, your sewing things. My wedding album? Yes, Ronald's blue overcoat." Carolyn's eyes shifted toward Gary. "That belongs to the estate," Gary said. Teresa set down the water. She had helped Ronald choose that coat. He complained about the price, then wore it for 15 winters. There was a loose button inside the left pocket. Teresa had meant to sew it back on. "You can keep the coat," Carolyn said quickly. "That's fine." Gary exhaled through his nose, but he didn't argue. It was a tiny thing, a coat that still smelled faintly of Ronald's cedar soap. Yet it was the first thing Teresa had asked for that morning, and received. She pulled the deed closer. The property description occupied half a page. The transfer language followed. Maple House, its lot, fixtures, outbuildings, and all furniture, records, tools, materials, and other contents remaining upon the premises were conveyed to Teresa Bennett in exchange for $5 and the signed release. Ronald had always read the dull lines. Teresa used to tease him about it. At the kitchen table, he would put on his glasses and move his finger down warranty cards, insurance renewals, and even appliance instructions. "The dull line is usually the expensive one," he would say. Teresa read the contents sentence again. She knew there was junk inside Maple House. Old mattresses, broken chairs, rusted radiators, cracked dishes, and whatever vandals had not carried away. Gary had said the cleanup alone could cost thousands. Still, the sentence was unusually broad. "Who wrote this deed?" she asked. Philip Crane glanced at the signature page. "The original transfer instructions came from Ronald's property file. I prepared the final form to match them." "When did he put the instructions there?" "I can't give you an exact date without checking the file." Carolyn tapped one finger against her folder. "It doesn't change what the building is." "No," Teresa said. "It changes what Ronald wanted transferred with it." Gary sat back. "Teresa, it's full of garbage. You've been inside?" "Not recently." "How recently?" He looked at Carolyn. Carolyn answered for him. The city inspector entered the first floor. "No one from the family has gone through the whole building. It isn't safe." Teresa returned to the first page. That gave her one answer and left her with another. Ronald had made sure the contents traveled with the building. His children had accepted the wording because they believed everything inside was worthless. She did not mistake that for a hidden gift. Ronald could be sentimental about places. He had once kept a box of bent cabinet hinges because the screws were still good. Maple House might contain nothing but the remains of his reluctance to throw things away. But the wording was his. She was certain of that now. Philip Crane folded his hands. "If you take the property, the stabilization order becomes your responsibility. The city's deadline does not restart with a new owner. How many days remain?" 90. Carolyn spoke gently, which was worse than when she sounded impatient. "You don't have to keep it. A demolition company might take the land in exchange for clearing the structure. Philip can provide names. I thought the land had value. It may have some. Enough to pay for itself?" No one answered. Teresa looked out the window. Rainwater ran down the glass in crooked paths. Somewhere below, a delivery truck gave 2 quick beeps while reversing. Ordinary life continued with an almost rude steadiness. She thought of the comfortable house where she had lived with Ronald for 25 years, the pantry shelves she'd lined herself, the small dent in the hallway wall from the day they tried to move a bookcase without taking the doors off, the lilac bush Ronald planted after their 10th anniversary. Carolyn and Gary spoke of that house as something she had merely occupied. Maple House, by contrast, would be hers. Wet roof, failed porch, condemned notice, and all. "What happens if I don't sign?" she asked. Gary rubbed his finger again. "Then everything takes longer. That's what happens to you." "What happens to me?" Philip Crane answered. "You could seek independent advice and consider a claim against Ronald's estate or the trust. I can't advise you about the strength of such a claim because I represent the trust." Carolyn looked at Teresa as if this were an unnecessary complication at the end of a long day. Dad set up the trust before he was sick. He knew what he was doing. Teresa knew Ronald had done many things before he was sick. That didn't mean he'd explained them. He avoided arguments until avoidance became its own decision. He had loved his children with a patience that sometimes looked like fear. He had loved Teresa too, but love did not change the names on bank accounts. "Did he tell either of you to offer me Maple House?" she asked. Carolyn's face remained still. Gary looked toward the window. That was answer enough. No, Carolyn said finally. That was our decision. We thought it was the cleanest way to give you a fresh start. Teresa almost smiled. Maple House had boarded windows and a collapsed gutter hanging over the rear steps. Nothing about it was clean, and nothing about it looked fresh. She picked up the pen. Gary's ankles stopped bouncing. Carolyn watched Teresa sign the release first. Her shoulders lowered slightly. Gary signed after her, then Carolyn. Philip Crane witnessed each name and placed the pages in separate stacks. When Teresa reached for the deed, Carolyn rested her hand on it. You understand, she said, once this is recorded, we can't be responsible for what happens at that property. Teresa met her eyes. That seems to be why you chose it. Carolyn removed her hand. Philip gave Teresa a temporary certified copy and said the recorded original would follow. He also passed her a thin envelope. Inside were 3 keys on a tarnished brass ring. One is marked front, he said. The others aren't labeled. Gary stood and buttoned his coat. I'd have someone look at the roof before you go inside. You said no one from the family had been through the building. I drove over last week. I didn't enter. Why did you go? To see what we were dealing with. Teresa slipped the keys into her handbag. Now you know? Carolyn gathered her folders. We'll arrange a time for your belongings. I'll send a list tonight. There's no need to make this difficult. I'll send a list so it isn't difficult. Carolyn's mouth tightened, but she nodded. Outside, the rain had thinned to mist. Teresa stood beneath the office awning with her 2 suitcases, Ronald's overcoat folded over one arm, and the deed inside her handbag. Carolyn and Gary left together without offering her a ride. Their car pulled away from the curb, clean and quiet. Teresa waited until it turned the corner. Then she carried 1 suitcase at a time to her 12-year-old station wagon. The coat went on the passenger seat. The suitcases fit in back. When she lowered the hatch, pain ran from her right shoulder to her elbow. She kept her hand on the car until it passed. She could have driven to her friend's apartment. She could have called a lawyer, though she had little money for one. She could have sat in the parking space and tried to understand how a marriage became a coat, 2 suitcases, and a building everyone else wanted condemned. Instead, she took out her phone and searched for the city building office. A clerk answered on the 4th ring. My name is Teresa Bennett, she said. I'm the new owner of Maple House on Maple Street. There was a pause. That Maple House? Yes. The clerk lowered her voice. Do you have the stabilization order? I do. I need a copy of every inspection report and the name of whoever last had authorized access. Paper moved at the other end. There's a caretaker listed on an older emergency contact sheet. Norman Butler. I don't know if the number is current. Please give it to me. Teresa wrote the number on the back of the envelope that had held the keys. Then she started the station wagon and drove toward Maple Street, not because she believed the house would save her, but because it was hers, and she had 90 days to keep it standing. Maple Street rose gently from the center of town, past small houses with narrow driveways and porches built close to the sidewalk. Maple House sat near the upper end, behind a leaning iron fence and 2 maple trees that had grown together over the front walk. Teresa slowed before the address, though there was no mistaking it. The house was 3 stories tall and wider than the photographs had made it seem. Its clapboards had once been pale green. Most were now gray. A strip of roofing felt hung from the west gutter and lifted whenever the wind caught it. Plywood covered the ground floor windows. On the porch, the red condemnation notice had been fastened at eye level. Teresa parked at the curb. The rain had stopped, but water still fell from the trees. She left her suitcases in the car and carried only her handbag. Ronald's coat remained on the passenger seat, neatly folded. The front gate opened 6 inches before dragging through wet leaves. Teresa put her weight against it, then stopped when her shoulder complained. She turned sideways and stepped through the gap. At the porch, she read the notice from beginning to end. Unsafe wiring, water intrusion, unstable rear exit, evidence of mold in the lower level, entry restricted to the owner, authorized workers, and inspectors. Occupancy prohibited until minimum safety conditions were met. Someone had written idiots in black marker across the city seal. Teresa tried the key marked front. It entered the lock, but would not turn. She pulled it out, wiped away grit with a tissue, and tried again. Nothing. The second key fit, but stopped halfway. The third did not fit at all. She stood beneath the sagging porch roof and looked through the narrow gap beside the plywood. The entry hall was dark. She could make out the bottom of a staircase and the shape of a chair lying on its side. Teresa took out her phone and called Norman Butler. A man answered with a cautious, "Hello? Is this Mr. Butler? Who's asking?" "My name is Teresa Bennett. I got your number from the city. I've just taken ownership of Maple House." There was silence long enough that she checked the screen. "Ronald's Teresa?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. Carolyn usually called her Teresa. Gary did too. In trust papers, she was Mrs. Bennett, and at the hospital, she had been listed as spouse. Nobody had ever called her Ronald's Teresa. "Yes. I heard he passed 9 days ago." "I'm sorry. He was a decent man." Teresa looked at the wet steps. "Thank you. You at the house now?" "I'm trying to get in." "Don't use the front door. I'd gathered that." The frame swelled. "You force it, the glass above the transom may come loose. There's a side entrance through the old pantry. Key has a square head." Teresa examined the ring. One key had a worn square head beneath its tarnish. "I have it. Watch the second porch board. It looks sound. It isn't." He spoke like a man who had said that before and expected not to be believed. "Are you still the caretaker?" she asked. "Not officially. City told me to stay out after they posted the place. Ronald kept paying me a little to check the roof and chase people off. That stopped when he got sick. Did you know he planned to transfer it to me?" "No." His answer came without hesitation. "Did he talk about selling it?" "No." "What did he plan to do with it?" Norman was quiet again. "He planned plenty. Doing was harder near the end." Teresa understood that better than she wanted to. "I have 90 days, she said. "I know what the order says." "Can the building be stabilized?" "Yes." The answer was so simple that Teresa pressed the phone closer. "For less than demolition? That depends how much work you're willing to see. I'm standing in front of it." "That's not the same as seeing it." A truck passed behind her, tires hissing over damp pavement. Norman asked, "You got a flashlight?" "In the car. Hard hat." "No." "Then don't go past the front hall. I'll meet you tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Teresa looked up at the third-floor windows. One pane had been replaced with a square of blue plastic. "I need somewhere to sleep tonight. Not there. I don't have many choices. Then use one of the choices that won't put a ceiling on your head. Tomorrow, we'll see if there's a room safe enough to clean out." He did not sound controlling. He sounded practical, which made it easier for her to listen. "Bring boots," he added. "Not those little rubber garden things." "How do you know what boots I own?" "I don't. People show up to bad buildings dressed for puddles." Teresa almost laughed. It was the first time the impulse had come since Ronald died. "I'll find boots." After ending the call, she returned to the station wagon and took out the flashlight. She went around the west side of the house, keeping away from the loose gutter. The side porch leaned slightly toward the yard. She tested each board with her heel and stepped over the second one. The square-headed key opened the pantry door. Inside, damp air met her at once. It smelled of plaster, old wood, and something sour from the basement. Teresa kept one foot outside, while she shone the light across empty shelves and a cracked linoleum floor. Beyond the pantry was a large kitchen. An iron stove stood against one wall. 2 cabinet doors hung open. A porcelain sink rested on blocks where its legs had rusted through. The floor felt firm beneath her shoes. She moved into the hall. The house had a central staircase with rooms opening on both sides. Faded numbers remained on several doors. 1, 2, and 3 were on the first floor. A handwritten inspection tag hung from each knob. Room 1 had a broken ceiling, where water had entered around the chimney. Room 2 was packed with rolled carpet and old screens. Room 3 held a narrow bed frame, a dresser without drawers, and several buckets placed beneath brown water stains. She did not go farther. Near the staircase, an old wooden board displayed brass hooks where tenants must once have hung their keys. 11 labels had been written beneath them in careful black lettering. Most had faded. Teresa ran the flashlight across the empty hooks, then heard water dripping somewhere behind the walls. The house did not feel like a home. It felt like a list of tasks waiting for money. She locked the pantry door and went back to the car. Carolyn had sent a message. "Your belongings will be ready at 4. Please use side garage entrance." Teresa checked the time. She had just under an hour. The house she had shared with Ronald stood on a quiet road outside town, with a stone wall along the front and a circular drive Carolyn had always found impressive. Teresa had once liked seeing the house reflected in the pond across the road. She had thought the view meant permanence. At 4, Gary opened the garage door before Teresa could ring the bell. "We put everything here," he said. 6 cardboard boxes stood beside the lawnmower. Her clothes had been packed into black trash bags. Teresa looked past him toward the mudroom. "I sent a list. We got most of it." Most? Carolyn had an appointment. She did what she could. Gary wore an old flannel shirt that Ronald had given him. The sleeves were too short, though Gary never seemed to notice. As he spoke, he kept one hand on the garage door frame, blocking the way inside without appearing to do so. Teresa opened the first box. Her wedding album was on top. Beneath it lay loose photographs, 3 cookbooks, her mother's sugar bowl, and a desk lamp wrapped in one of her bath towels. "The lamp isn't mine. It was in your sewing room. It was Ronald's mother's." Gary shrugged. "Then keep it." The second box contained shoes. The third held her sewing machine with the cord wound around the base. "Where are my financial papers?" "What financial papers?" "Tax returns, medical bills, my bank statements." The folder was in the bottom desk drawer. "Carolyn's going through the office. Anything personal will be separated. I need those now. She's making sure trust documents don't get mixed in." Teresa straightened. "I filed our taxes. I know. I organized the medical bills. I know that too. Then why does Carolyn need to decide which papers are personal?" Gary's jaw tightened. "Because she's a trustee." The answer came automatically. Teresa remembered how often Ronald had used the same sentence. "Carolyn's a trustee. Let her review it. Carolyn understands the account." It had been easier to let Ronald handle the disagreement than to insist on being included. Easier to accept grocery money from their joint household account, while the larger sums moved somewhere she never saw. She had told herself she wasn't interested in investments. That was partly true. She had also liked believing Ronald would always be there to explain whatever mattered. Now Gary stood in the doorway of her own mudroom, and she could not prove which papers belonged to her. "I'll wait while you get the folder," she said. "I'm not letting you search the office. I didn't ask to search. I asked you to bring it. Carolyn has the keys. You're inside the house. The office is locked." Teresa looked at him. Gary glanced away first. It was not a victory. It was only confirmation. They had not packed in haste. Carolyn had locked the office and removed access before offering Teresa a time to collect her things. "Bring me a sheet of paper," Teresa said. "What for?" "I'm writing down what's missing. You'll sign that I asked for it." Gary stared at her. "Come on. You don't have to agree the papers are mine. You only have to confirm I asked." He remained in the doorway for several seconds. Then he went inside. Teresa checked the other boxes while she waited. Her winter clothes were missing. So were her jewelry case, her passport, her laptop charger, and the small wooden tray where Ronald kept spare keys. Gary returned with paper and a pen. Teresa wrote each item clearly. She added Ronald's shaving mug, not because it was valuable, but because he had kept it on the bathroom shelf throughout their marriage. It had a dark green rim and a crack near the handle. "You want his shaving mug?" Gary asked. "Yes. Why? Because I do." He signed the bottom of the page. Teresa photographed it with her phone and gave him the original. They loaded the boxes in silence. Gary carried the sewing machine, despite her saying she could manage. When he lifted the last trash bag, a pair of heavy leather work boots fell onto the garage floor. "These yours?" he asked. Teresa recognized them. Ronald had bought them for her after they purchased a neglected garden plot years earlier. Carolyn had laughed because Teresa polished them before putting them away. "They are. They look barely used. They fit." Gary placed them beside the driver's seat. He stood with the car door open, one hand resting on its roof. Up close, he looked tired. There were gray threads in his beard Teresa had not noticed at the funeral. "Where are you staying?" he asked. "With someone." "Who?" "A friend." He nodded, though he knew very little about Teresa's friends. Carolyn and Gary came for holidays, birthdays, and dinners arranged around Ronald. Teresa cooked, remembered who disliked onions, wrapped the gifts, and stepped back when family photographs were taken. She had believed usefulness would become belonging if she kept at it long enough. Gary glanced toward the boxes. "That property isn't safe. Neither is having your papers locked in someone else's office." His face changed. "Not much, but enough." "I'll talk to Carolyn," he said. "Do that." Teresa closed the car door. She spent one more night on the fold-out couch. In the morning, she dressed before sunrise. packed a thermos of coffee, and tied the work boots firmly around her ankles. At 9 o'clock, she was waiting beside the iron gate when an old green pickup stopped at the curb. Norman Butler climbed out slowly. He was 79, tall but bent slightly at the waist, with white hair under a canvas cap. He carried 2 hard hats and a red metal toolbox marked with years of scratches. He looked at Teresa's boots, then at the house. "All right," he said. "Let's find out what Ronald left you to work with." Norman handed her one of the hard hats. The inside band was too large. Teresa adjusted it while he tested the iron gate, then walked around it instead of wasting effort. At the side porch, he tapped the weak board with the toe of his boot. "Still the same one," he said. "You haven't been here since the city notice?" "Not inside. I drove past." He unlocked the pantry door with his own key. Teresa looked at it. "They didn't ask you to return that? Nobody asked me anything." He went in first and stood quietly, listening. Teresa heard the same steady drip as the day before. "Water's moving," Norman said. "That's good." "How is water moving good?" "Means it found a way down. Bad is when it sits above your head." He opened the back door of the kitchen and examined the frame without stepping onto the rear porch. Morning light showed how far the porch had pulled away from the house. One support post leaned into the weeds. "That comes off," he said. "We don't save it." Teresa had thought she would need to save everything. Hearing him release one damaged part gave her room to think. "Can we secure the building in 90 days? "We can secure it sooner, if you don't confuse secure with pretty." "I won't. Everybody says that until they find old wallpaper." They began on the first floor. Norman pushed an awl into window frames, floorboards, and the base of the stair rail. When the wood resisted, he nodded. When it softened, he marked it with yellow chalk. Teresa wrote each problem in a small notebook. Room 1 needed ceiling work. Room 2 was dry but full. Room 3 had water damage near the chimney. The kitchen floor remained solid except beneath the sink. The pantry door needed a stronger lock. The front entry required new framing before anyone could use it safely. At the foot of the stairs, Norman looked at the brass hooks. "You still have 11 keys?" Teresa asked. "Had more over the years. 11 rooms, front, side, cellar, boiler room." She pointed to the labels. "That matches. Mostly. What doesn't?" He ran one finger across the wooden board, stopping beyond the final label. "There used to be another number." Teresa waited. Norman looked toward the staircase. "Room 12. There are 11 labels. Now there are." "Where was 12? Second floor, I think." "You think?" "I never had a reason to open it." Teresa lowered the notebook. "How could you be caretaker and not know where a room was?" "Because it wasn't leased. Not in my time." "Then why call it a room?" "That's what Ronald called it." Norman climbed the first 3 stairs, testing each one before putting his full weight down. Teresa followed. "What did he say about it?" "Mostly, leave 12 alone." "That's all?" He wasn't paying me for questions. The second floor hall ran from the staircase to a window at the west end. 5 numbered doors opened along it. Rooms 4 and 5 faced the street. 6, 7, and 8 faced the rear or side yard. Teresa counted again. 5 up here, 3 below, 3 on the 3rd floor. "That's 11. I can count." Maybe Ronald was talking about a room that existed before the house was changed. Maybe. Norman's tone said he did not believe that. "Did you ever see a 12th door?" "Years ago, I remember a number. Not much more." "You remember a number but not a door?" "I was carrying roofing tar the day Ronald walked me through. There was rain coming. My mind was on the roof." Teresa studied the hall. The walls had been patched many times. Different widths of trim met at uneven corners. Faded wallpaper showed through where plaster had broken away. Nothing looked sealed. Nothing looked special. Norman pushed open room 8. Sunlight entered through 2 narrow windows. The ceiling was stained near one corner, but the plaster remained firm. A metal bed frame stood against the wall. There was also a washstand with no bowl and a straight-back chair covered in dust. "This one stayed dry after Ronald fixed the flashing," Norman said. "Could I sleep here?" "Could" and "should" are different words. "Would the floor hold?" "Yes." "Would the ceiling fall?" "Not unless the roof gets worse." "Can the door lock?" "From inside." "Then this is the room." Norman turned toward her. "City says no occupancy." "I read the notice. They can remove you. They have to find me first." He did not smile. Teresa put down her notebook. I have enough money for a few nights somewhere cheap. Then I have enough money to start work. I don't have enough for both. You tell the city that. They won't care. I'm not asking them to care. Norman looked out the window. His pickup was visible beside Teresa's station wagon. Ronald would have put you in a hotel, he said. Ronald isn't here. The words came out sharper than she intended. Norman nodded once. No, he said. He isn't. They continued upstairs. The third floor had low ceilings and smaller rooms. Room 9 contained bird feathers and a broken window. Room 10 had a section of plaster hanging by strips of old wallpaper. Room 11 was dry, but one floorboard dipped enough that Norman told Teresa to stay near the wall. He opened a narrow door at the end of the hall. Behind it, steep steps led to the attic. The roof damage looked worse from below. Water had blackened several boards near the west slope. One rafter was cracked, and daylight showed around a vent pipe. Norman shone his flashlight along the rafters. Temporary brace here. Replace these boards. Patch around the vent. Main leaks farther toward the rear. How much? For materials? For what has to happen first? He named a figure that used more than half of Teresa's available savings. She wrote it down anyway. That assumes we do the clearing and bracing, he said. A roofing crew handles the outside. We? I'm not climbing that roof at 79. I wasn't asking you to. You were thinking it. Teresa closed the notebook. Can you still brace a rafter? Yes. Can I? With that shoulder? She had not mentioned the injury. Norman pointed toward her right arm. You keep holding it against your side. I can lift below chest height. Then you can measure, cut short lengths, carry one at a time, and stop pretending pain is information nobody else can see. Teresa looked at the damaged roof boards. Fair enough. In the cellar, they found the source of the steady dripping. Water from a clogged exterior drain was entering through a coal chute and falling into an old utility sink. The sink's drain was open, so most of it flowed away instead of spreading across the floor. Norman gave Teresa a pair of work gloves. They went outside and followed the downspout to a ground drain buried beneath leaves and maple seeds. The inspection report says the cellar has active flooding, Teresa said. It did during the spring thaw. It says drainage failure. That part's right. He removed the drain cover. Mud filled the opening. Teresa knelt carefully and pulled away handfuls of wet leaves. Norman loosened packed dirt with a narrow steel rod. After several minutes, the blockage gave way. Brown water dropped through the pipe with a hollow rush. They returned to the cellar. The drip slowed, then stopped. Teresa watched the dry utility sink. One problem, she said. One small problem. It still counts. It does. Norman looked pleased, though he tried not to show it. He marked the downspout on her list and wrote clean monthly beside it. They ate lunch on the front steps. Teresa had brought cheese sandwiches, 2 apples, and the thermos. Norman accepted coffee, but turned down an apple because of his teeth. Ronald gave me this job when nobody else would hire me, he said. Teresa waited. Norman seemed like a man who came to a point by his own route. I'd been laid off from the machine shop. Plant closed with 2 weeks' notice. I was old enough that employers saw my age before they saw my hands. Ronald needed someone to keep people out and water off. It wasn't much money, but it was regular. How long ago? About 22 years since he first brought me here. He sealed off part of the house around then. Teresa looked at him. What part? I don't know exactly. You were caretaker. After the work was done. Who did the work? Ronald handled it. By himself? I never asked. Teresa felt irritation rise, then let it settle. Norman had already told her what kind of arrangement it had been. Ronald paid him to protect the building, not investigate it. Did he keep records here? She asked. In the old office. First floor, beyond room 3. I didn't see an office. Doors behind the rolled carpet in 2. The rooms were rearranged before my time. They carried the carpet rolls out through the side entrance. Teresa pulled from the lower end while Norman guided them around the doorframe. On the 4th roll, pain caught in her shoulder. She released it and stepped back. Norman did not tell her to be careful. He stood the roll upright and waited. Give me a minute, she said. You get 2. She moved her fingers until the tingling stopped, then took the lighter end. Behind the final roll was a narrow door painted the same beige as the wall. Norman's key opened it. The office was barely larger than a closet. A steel desk filled most of the space. Shelves held cans of screws, window latches, old paintbrushes, and folded plastic sheeting. A calendar from several years earlier still hung above the desk. Teresa opened the drawers. The first held blank work order forms. The second contained receipts for roofing tar, plywood, locks, and pest control. The lowest drawer stuck. Norman braced the desk, while Teresa pulled with her left hand. Inside were 3 notebooks with Ronald's name written on the covers. They were not diaries. Each page listed dates, jobs, costs, and names. Ronald had recorded every payment to Norman. He had also tracked repairs to the roof, gutters, windows, and foundation. The latest entry was from the year before Ronald died. Teresa read it twice. Carolyn had told her Maple House was a forgotten liability. Gary had said nobody knew what condition it was in. Yet Ronald had been paying for small repairs until his health worsened. "Did his children know you were working here?" she asked. "Gary saw me once. Few years back. He asked why his father bothered. What did Ronald say? He said the house wasn't ready." "Ready for what?" "Didn't say." Teresa turned through the notebook. Several pages had been removed cleanly near the middle. The remaining entries continued without explanation. Norman pointed to a line from 22 years earlier. "Masonry complete, interior preserved. Do not disturb west partition." Teresa read the line aloud. Norman took off his cap and scratched the back of his head. "That could be what I remember. What's the west partition?" "Could mean upstairs. Could mean the attic. Could mean a cellar wall." "Would it be on the old plans?" If the plans survived, the office shelf held inspection papers, tax bills, and insurance notices. But no plans. Teresa searched every drawer again. She found a small envelope of picture hooks and a dead flashlight. Nothing more. The deliberate search had answered one question. Ronald had not simply neglected Maple House. He had spent years keeping it from falling beyond repair. It also gave Teresa a new problem. If she stabilized the roof without understanding the west partition, workers might remove the very thing Ronald had ordered left alone. She closed the notebook. "We don't tear into any west wall until we know what he meant." Norman put his cap back on. "That could slow the roof crew. Then we inspect before they start." "With what?" Teresa opened the building report. A floor sketch had been stapled to the back, drawn too roughly to show wall thickness. She looked from the sketch to Ronald's entry. "A tape measure," she said. By late afternoon, room 8 had been swept, the windows secured, and the old bed frame tightened with bolts from Norman's toolbox. Teresa laid a camping pad across it and brought in one suitcase. Her lamp worked only if power returned, so she placed a battery lantern on the washstand. Norman left after making her promise not to use the staircase in darkness. Teresa waited until his pickup disappeared, then carried Ronald's notebooks upstairs. She set them beside the lantern, took out the tape measure Norman had loaned her, and began comparing the length of the second-floor hall with the exterior wall. The inside wall was shorter by almost 9 feet. Teresa measured it again. She hooked the tape against the west window frame and walked it back toward the staircase. Then she went downstairs, stepped over the weak porch board, and measured the outside of the house with her flashlight held beneath one arm. She allowed for the thickness of the walls. She allowed for the slope of the lot. She even allowed for the possibility that she had read the tape wrong in the dark. The space was still missing. On the second floor, room 5 occupied the front west corner. Room 8 occupied the rear west corner. Between them, the hallway ended at a broad plastered section that looked thicker than it needed to be. A narrow table had been pushed against it. The table was gray with dust, except where Teresa had set down her lantern. She ran her fingers over the plaster. It was cool and slightly uneven. Nothing about it looked like a door. A mouse moved somewhere above the ceiling. Teresa heard the quick scrape of its feet, then silence. She carried the lantern into room 8 and sat on the bed frame. The camping pad was thin enough that she could feel each metal support beneath it. Her shoulder ached from moving carpet rolls. She took 2 pain tablets with cold coffee and tried to read Ronald's notebook, but the words blurred. "Masonry complete, interior preserved. Do not disturb west partition." 9 feet of the house sat behind that wall. She did not sleep much. At 7 the next morning, Gary called. "I have your folder," he said. Teresa sat up slowly. "The financial papers? And your passport. Carolyn found the jewelry case, too. When can I get them?" "I can bring them by." Teresa looked around room 8. The lantern had dimmed during the night. Her open suitcase rested beside the washstand, and Ronald's notebooks were stacked on the chair. "Meet me at Maple House." There was a pause. You're there? Yes. You spent the night? I said to meet me here. Teresa, the place is condemned, so I've heard. Gary arrived 40 minutes later in a silver sport utility vehicle. He did not come through the gate. Teresa walked to the curb in her work boots and accepted a plastic storage box through the open passenger window. Her financial folder lay on top. The passport and jewelry case were beneath it. Ronald's shaving mug had been wrapped in a hand towel. Teresa lifted it carefully. The green rim was chipped in one place, but it was the right mug. Thank you, she said. Gary studied the house over her shoulder. You really stayed in there? One room is dry. That doesn't make it safe. No? What are you doing about the order? Inspecting the roof, getting prices. With what money? My money. He rubbed his thumb across his finger. Carolyn thinks you should talk to a demolition company before you spend anything. Carolyn can hire one for her own house. His face tightened. She's trying to keep you from making a bad decision. She locked my papers in the office. That was a mistake. Did she say that? Gary did not answer. Teresa closed the storage box. I asked for my winter clothes too. I'll check. Don't check. Bring them. He looked as if he might argue. Instead, he nodded once. That was the boundary. Small, late, and not yet trustworthy, but spoken plainly enough that he had heard it. As Gary drove away, Norman's pickup turned onto Maple Street. The two vehicles passed each other. Gary slowed for a moment, watching the older truck, then continued downhill. Norman carried a carpenter's square, 2 flashlights, and a longer measuring tape. You look tired, he said. The room's 9 feet short. That'll do it? They began outside while the morning was clear. Norman measured from the front corner to each window. Teresa wrote the numbers. Then they repeated the work inside. The missing section lay between rooms 5 and 8, exactly where the broad plastered wall interrupted the hall. Norman tapped it with the handle of a screwdriver. The sound was dull near the edges and harder in the center. Brick, he said. Ronald's note says masonry. Looks like he meant it. Why brick over an interior room? Fire protection, security, damp control, could be plenty of reasons. Wouldn't he leave an opening? Maybe he did. Norman crouched near the baseboard. His knees cracked loudly enough that Teresa looked down. Getting old, he said. You're already old. So are you. Not as old as you. That's the nicest thing anybody's said to me this week. The baseboard continued across the wall, but its center section was a different wood. Newer nails had been set below the paint. Norman followed the edge upward with his flashlight. There, he said. A faint vertical line ran through the plaster. Another line appeared several feet to the right. They were too straight to be ordinary cracks. Teresa touched one with her left index finger. Door frame? Could be. He used the corner of a putty knife to lift a loose curl of paint. Beneath it was another layer, then old cream-colored plaster. We don't dig until we know what's holding what, he said. Teresa nodded, but she kept looking. At shoulder height, a rounded patch stood slightly proud of the wall. It was small, perhaps the width of her palm. Paint had gathered around its edges. What's that? Norman leaned closer. Patch over a hole, maybe. Teresa scraped gently with the flat edge of the putty knife. A thin flake came free. Beneath it, something dark caught the light. Norman took the knife from her and worked around the object, removing no more plaster than necessary. A curved strip of metal appeared, then a straight edge. Teresa held the flashlight. It was a tarnished brass number 1. Norman cleared another inch to the right. The top curve of a second number emerged. Dust ran down the wall and collected on the baseboard. A 2. They stood in the narrow hall, looking at the number 12. Norman let out a breath through his nose. I didn't imagine it. No. The numbers had been mounted directly on old wooden trim. The doorway remained behind plaster and brick, but its shape was visible now. Teresa thought of Ronald walking this hall while the room was being closed. He had ordered the masonry. He had written that the interior was preserved. Then he had spent years paying Norman to keep water away from the building. What's inside? She asked. Norman shook his head. I never knew. Did Ronald have a key? Not for brick. You said the room was never leased. That's what I remember. Before he sealed it, before he owned the place, from what he told me. The old caretaker before me said 11 rooms brought rent. 12 was kept off the books. Why? He didn't say. Teresa looked at the faint doorway lines. The obvious thing was to open it. The sensible thing was to secure the roof first. A gust struck the west side of the house. Something above them gave a light wooden knock. Norman looked toward the ceiling. That's your answer for today. They covered the exposed numbers with clear plastic and painter's tape to keep loose plaster from falling away. Teresa photographed the wall from several angles. Norman held a ruler beside the trim so the size would be clear. At 10, the roofing estimator arrived. He spent nearly an hour in the attic and around the yard. He would not climb the west slope until temporary bracing was installed. From the ground, he could see enough to confirm that the damage section had spread beyond the vent. You need the rear third strip to sound boards, he told Teresa. Temporary patches won't buy you 90 days if we get another hard storm. Can you save the interior wall below it? He looked at the photograph on her phone. My crew works from above, but we'll need to carry some material through the second floor unless you rent a lift. Then you don't carry it through this section. That's the shortest route. It's closed. He named the additional cost for a small exterior lift and disposal chute. Teresa wrote the figure beside Norman's earlier estimate. Together, the roof, bracing, and exterior equipment would take nearly all the money she had left after immediate expenses. How soon? She asked. I have an opening next week. After that, 3 weeks, maybe 4. The weather forecast showed heavy rain in 8 days. Teresa paid a deposit before he left. Norman watched her sign. You sure? No, that's honest. If the roof fails, nothing behind that wall matters. Also honest. The deposit secured the date but created work for them. The attic had to be braced within 6 days. The side yard needed to be cleared for the lift. The roofing crew required electricity for tools, which meant Teresa had to pay for a temporary service panel or add generator rental to the bill. They spent the afternoon cutting brush along the west side. Teresa used hand clippers because the pull cord on Norman's small trimmer aggravated her shoulder. She worked slowly, making piles that he dragged toward the street. Near the foundation, they uncovered an exterior window hidden behind a sheet of weathered plywood. It sat exactly where the missing room should have been. Norman removed 2 screws, then stopped. Ronald installed these from the inside, he said. How can you tell? The heads are under the outer board. This panel's part of the wall now. No light entered around its edges. The window had been deliberately covered, sealed, and protected. Teresa added it to her photographs, but did not touch it again. By 5, they had cleared enough space for the lift. Norman went home with the measurements for the attic braces. Teresa washed her hands with bottled water in the kitchen and sat at the steel desk. She opened Ronald's oldest notebook. Now that she knew what she was looking for, she noticed a small notation beside the masonry entry. 2 initials and a telephone number had been written in the margin. The number had been crossed out, but the initials remained. LV. Farther back, Teresa found the same initials beside a note about preservation photographs. No explanation followed. Norman had mentioned that Ronald sometimes worked with people from a museum. Teresa searched her phone for museum staff in New Hampshire and found Lauren Vaughn, acquisitions director, age 42. Her staff photograph showed a woman with dark curly hair and serious eyes. Teresa called the museum's main number the next morning. When Lauren came on the line, Teresa said, "My husband kept your initials in a maintenance book for Maple House." Lauren did not answer at once. "Ronald Bennett?" she asked. "Yes. I'm sorry. I heard he was ill, but I didn't know. He died 10 days ago." "Oh, Teresa." Lauren knew her name. That unsettled Teresa almost as much as Norman calling her Ronald's Teresa. "I found a sealed doorway," Teresa said. The number 12 was plastered over. Lauren's chair moved at the other end of the call. "Please don't open it," she said. "I wasn't planning to. The roof has to be secured first. That's not what I mean. Don't remove the trim. Don't clean the metal. Don't let anyone drill through the wall until I see it." "Why?" Lauren took a breath. "Because Ronald once showed me photographs of a room in that building. Not the contents, just the exterior details. He was worried someone would separate what belonged together. What belonged together? He never told me enough to make a museum claim. He said he would call when the building was safe. He didn't. No." Teresa looked at the photograph of the tarnished 12. "Can you come to Claremont? I can come Friday. What will you be looking for? Whether the trim is original, whether the opening matches the photographs, whether anything Ronald hoped to protect could still be there. And if it is, I can't promise anything on behalf of the museum. I'm not asking for a promise." "What are you asking for?" Teresa glanced through the office doorway toward the hall, where the house waited under its failing roof. "The truth before, I spend everything I have protecting a wall." Lauren agreed to come Friday. Teresa ended the call, placed Ronald's notebook beside the deed, and wrote one new instruction at the top of the work list. Nobody opened room 12 until the roof held. By Wednesday afternoon, the first attic brace was standing. Norman had cut the lumber in the side yard because there was no safe place to run a saw inside. Teresa measured each length twice, marked it, and carried the shorter pieces upstairs one at a time. They laid protective boards across the third-floor hallway so the weight would spread over several joists. The work was slow. Nothing could be forced into place without sending a new crack through the ceiling below. "Quarter-inch left," Norman said. Teresa turned the jack handle with her left hand. Too much. She eased it back. There. Norman fitted the brace beneath the damaged rafter and drove screws through the metal plate. When he removed the jack, the brace held. They both stood still. The roof did not move. The floor did not complain. Dust floated in the beam of Teresa's headlamp. "1," she said. "3 more. It still counts." Norman looked at her, then nodded. "It counts." Teresa's phone rang downstairs. She let it ring. They installed the second brace before stopping. On the way down, her shoulder began to throb. She kept her right hand on the stair rail and carried nothing. The missed call was from Carolyn. The message said, "Call me today. It's important." Teresa put the phone away. She and Norman finished clearing the west yard before dark. The roofing company had marked a rectangle where the lift would stand. Beneath the brush, they found broken paving stones leading from the side porch toward the rear of the property. Norman remembered tenants using the path to reach a laundry shed that no longer existed. "The yard could be decent," he said. "It could be level. I'll settle for that. You keep saying things like someone who plans to stay." Teresa looked up at room 8's windows. Her blanket was visible through the glass. "I'm not spending my savings, so a demolition company gets a dry building." Norman rested both hands on the rake. "Good answer." Carolyn called again while Teresa was heating soup on a small camping stove outside the pantry door. Teresa turned off the burner before answering. "Gary says you're living there," Carolyn said. "Gary brought my papers. He said there was a contractor." "There was." "And someone from a museum is coming?" Teresa looked toward the street. Gary must have seen Lauren's name written on the whiteboard beside the office desk, or he had heard more than Teresa realized during his visit. Then she remembered speaking to the museum from the office with the front hall open. Gary had driven away before that call. He could only know if someone had told him afterward. How did Gary hear about Lauren? "Who's Lauren? The person you just mentioned." "I said someone from a museum." "No, you said someone from a museum is coming." "How did you know?" Carolyn took a moment too long. "The roofing company called the trust office about insurance. The trust doesn't own the house. They had the old billing details." Teresa's stomach tightened. The roofing company had asked whether prior insurance information remained available. She had given Ronald's name so they could identify old roof work. A receptionist must have called the number on file. "What did you tell them?" Teresa asked. "That ownership had changed." "Anything else?" I asked. "Why museum access was being scheduled before safety work. That wasn't your question to ask." "Teresa, if people are entering a condemned building, it becomes everyone's concern. No, it becomes mine." Carolyn softened her voice. "You're grieving. I'm not saying that to dismiss you. I'm saying it because large decisions made right after a death can feel different later." Teresa looked at the folding chair across from her. Ronald would have sat there with his soup. He would have added too many crackers and left crumbs in his lap. "Offering me the house was a large decision," Teresa said. "Did grief affect yours? That's not fair. It's the same week." Carolyn breathed out slowly. "A local buyer has asked about the lot before. I could contact him. You might get out without losing much." "Why quietly?" "I didn't say quietly." "You were about to." There was silence. Teresa knew Carolyn's habits. When a problem could affect the family standing, Carolyn wanted it handled before neighbors began asking questions. She had changed funeral florists because the first one misspelled Ronald's middle name on a proof nobody else would see. "The house has a public notice on the door," Teresa said. "There's no quiet version. I'm trying to help you avoid embarrassment." "Whose?" Carolyn ended the call soon after that. She said they would speak later, but Teresa did not agree to it. On Thursday, the temporary electrical panel arrived. It took most of Teresa's remaining cash that was not already committed to the roof. The electrician mounted it on an exterior post, tested the outlet, and left. Teresa plugged in one work light and watched it glow in the dark kitchen. She carried the desk lamp upstairs. The shade was yellowed, and one corner had come loose from its wire frame. When she switched it on, warm light spread across room 8. It was not much. The plaster was cracked. Her clothes remained in bags. A draft entered beneath the door. Still, she could see without a battery lantern. She sat on the edge of the camping pad and opened her financial folder. The numbers were worse when laid out together. Her personal checking account could cover food and modest bills. Her small savings account was being consumed by Maple House. She had a monthly retirement payment, but it was not enough for rent elsewhere and serious repairs here. For years, the household account had paid the ordinary costs of her life. Teresa had known which grocery store had the best produce and when the heating oil company offered a discount. She had not known the total balance of the investment account that paid the bills. She had allowed financial safety to remain something Ronald supplied. That knowledge hurt differently from what Carolyn and Gary had done. It gave Teresa no one else to blame. She turned off the lamp and slept. Lauren arrived Friday in a dark blue car with a canvas bag and a folding inspection light. She wore flat shoes, gray trousers, and a raincoat damp at the shoulders. Before entering, she read the condemnation notice. "You weren't exaggerating," she said. "I didn't describe it. That may have been wise." Teresa gave her a hard hat. Norman was already inside, tightening the final brace. He came down when he heard voices and shook Lauren's hand. "I remember you," Lauren said. "You brought Ronald to the museum after his eye procedure. He wasn't supposed to drive. He tried anyway." "That sounds right," Teresa said. For a moment, the three of them shared a version of Ronald that felt whole. Not the patient in the hospital. Not the name on trust papers. A stubborn man reaching for his car keys when he could barely focus. Lauren followed Teresa to the second floor. She did not touch the wall immediately. She set up her light, photographed the exposed numbers, and examined the edges of the plaster with a magnifying lens. "The numerals are older than the top paint layers," she said. "That doesn't prove the doorway was always numbered. 12, but they weren't added recently." Norman pointed to the trim. "Same profile as the other rooms?" Lauren measured it. Then she compared it with the trim around room 8. Same width, same molding pattern. The nail placement is consistent too. "So, it was a door," Teresa said. "It appears to have been." "Can you tell when it was closed?" "Not exactly. The masonry may be newer than the wood. I'd need exposed mortar to estimate anything, and I don't want to damage it for an estimate." Teresa showed her the photograph of the covered exterior window. Lauren examined that next. She crouched beside the plywood without trying to remove it. "Ronald sent me a close photograph of this casing years ago," she said. "Why?" He asked whether it was worth preserving. "What did you tell him?" "That the whole building was worth documenting. Claremont had boarding houses tied to mill workers, traveling salesmen, and rail traffic. Most lost their interiors through conversion or demolition." "Did he mention room 12? "Not by number." "Did he tell you what was inside?" "No. He said one interior had remained together and that opening it carelessly would destroy the point." Teresa looked at the covered window. "What point?" "I asked him the same thing, and he said he was still collecting records." That sounded like Ronald. He would delay an explanation until every receipt, name, and date sat in the right order. Sometimes he never reached the explanation at all. Lauren returned to the hall and studied the doorway again. "If the interior survived, the room itself may matter more than any single object," she said. "But I can't speak for the museum without seeing it. I understand. I mean, I can't promise acquisition, funding, or even conservation help." "I understand that too." Lauren looked relieved. She had likely met owners who heard the word museum and began spending money they did not have. "What can you give me?" Teresa asked. "A written observation that the opening and trim appear original to the room layout, and that removal should wait for controlled access." "Will you send it today?" "Yes." That was useful. The roof crew could not dismiss the wall as abandoned plaster if Teresa had a professional reason to protect it. They walked through the office. Lauren recognized Ronald's handwriting and turned the notebook pages carefully. She stopped at the missing section. "Were these gone when you found it?" "Yes." "Do you have any of his property files from home?" "His children control the office." Lauren glanced at Teresa, but did not ask for details. She copied the initials and the maintenance entry. Then she wrote her direct number on a business card. "When the roof is secure, call me," she said. I'll come back before you open anything. At the front gate, Lauren noticed a silver vehicle parked halfway down the block. Teresa recognized Gary's sport utility vehicle. He was sitting behind the wheel. When he saw them looking, he started the engine and drove away. Lauren turned to Teresa. Was he waiting for you? No, Teresa said. He was waiting to see whether you found something. That evening, Gary called with an offer. He did not mention Lauren at first. He asked about the roof, the deadline, and how much Teresa had spent. Then he said he might be willing to buy Maple House from her personally. For the land? Teresa asked. For everything. You could walk away now. How much? He named a sum large enough to replace what she had spent and leave several months of living expenses. 2 weeks earlier, Gary had described the property as a demolition burden. Now, he wanted the deed before the roof was repaired. Teresa stood in the office with Ronald's notebook open beneath the new work light. Why would you pay that for a liability? She asked. I'm trying to give you a way out. You already gave me one. This is different. Yes, Teresa said. Now you think there may be something behind the wall. Gary denied it too quickly. Teresa let him finish. Then she closed the notebook. The house isn't for sale. You don't know what you're taking on. I know more than I did when you handed me the keys. She ended the call, wrote Gary's offer and the date on a clean page, then placed that record in the same folder as the deed. The roof work was due to begin in 3 days, and now Ronald's children were watching the house. The first roofing truck arrived before 7 on Monday morning. Its warning lights flashed against the boarded windows. The lift came next, followed by a trailer carrying lumber and rolls of black membrane. By 8, the west yard was crowded with men, equipment, and the sharp smell of cut wood. Teresa signed the work order on the hood of the truck. The crew leader showed her one added line. Once they removed the damaged roofing, any rotted boards beyond the estimate would cost extra by the sheet. How likely is that? She asked. He looked up at the roof. Very. Norman had already moved the furniture out of room 8 and covered Teresa's suitcase with plastic. He stayed on the second floor while the crew raised materials past the sealed window. His only job was to watch the plaster around the hidden doorway. Teresa worked below, clearing debris from the path and keeping the temporary power cord away from the lift. She had marked the west partition with strips of bright orange tape. Nobody was to lean materials against it. Nobody was to use it as a shortcut. At 10, the crew leader called her outside. The first roof boards had come off. From the lift platform, he showed her a dark line running farther toward the chimney than anyone had expected. That section's gone too, he said. How much more? He named a figure. Teresa looked down at the side yard. From that height, the house's damage seemed almost orderly. One line of failed boards, one broken gutter, one porch separating at the posts. It was only when money was attached that every dark patch became heavy. Do it, she said. He made her initial the change. By noon, clouds had gathered over the hills. The crew moved faster. Sheets of new wood rose on the lift. Old material came down through the chute and struck the trailer with loud, flat crashes. Inside, dust loosened from the ceilings. Norman called Teresa upstairs to show her a fresh hairline crack near the number 12. It hasn't opened, he said, but I want another brace beneath this joist. The spare lumber was outside. I'll get it. You stay here and watch the wall. Norman started to argue, then heard another load land in the trailer. Short piece, he said. Carry it low. Teresa found the board beside the porch. It was not heavy, but it was awkward. She tucked one end against her hip and guided the other through the pantry. A worker came through the kitchen carrying a bundle of broken trim. He shifted to avoid her. Teresa turned too quickly. The end of her board struck the doorframe and stopped. Her body did not. Pain tore through her right shoulder and down her arm. The board fell. Teresa caught the counter with her left hand and stood bent over it, unable to breathe properly. The worker called for help. I'm fine, she said. She was not. Norman came downstairs. One look at her face ended the discussion. You're going to the clinic. The roof is open. I'm here. The wall isn't going anywhere. The crew needs decisions. Then they can ask me and I can call you. Teresa pressed her hand against her side. I can't afford to lose today. You already lost the use of that arm. He took her car keys from the counter before she could object. At the clinic, the nurse cut away the sleeve of Teresa's old work shirt because she could not lift her arm. The doctor ordered an image to rule out a new tear. Nothing was broken, and the joint remained in place, but she had badly aggravated the old injury. No lifting, the doctor said. No overhead work. Keep it supported for several days, then start gentle movement. If the weakness continues, you'll need further evaluation. How much lifting? None. I'm repairing a building, then repair it with your left hand from a chair. The sling cost extra, so did the image. Teresa paid from the account she had been saving for food and fuel. Norman picked her up. He had dirt on his trousers and plaster dust in his hair. How's the wall? She asked before the car door closed. Still a wall? The roof? Half covered. They found more rot by the chimney. How much? He told her. Teresa leaned her head against the seat. That takes the rest, she said. I know. He drove back without offering comfort she had not asked for. Rain began before they reached Maple Street. It struck the windshield in large drops, then came hard enough that the wipers struggled. The roof crew was fastening the last temporary membrane when they arrived. Teresa stood beneath the pantry awning, with her right arm held against her body. Water streamed from the new edge into the gutters. None entered the kitchen. Upstairs, the crack beside room 12 had not widened. Norman had installed the additional brace himself. The crew leader brought Teresa the revised total. She checked the figures and paid the balance from her phone. When the confirmation appeared, her savings account held less than the cost of 1 week in a motel. The roof was not finished. 2 dry days were still needed for flashing and shingles. It was secure against the rain, though, and that was what the deadline required first. Teresa slept badly again. Every movement pulled at her shoulder. She could not take off the sling without help, so she wore it through the night. In the morning, Norman arrived with oatmeal in a covered bowl. I can cook, she said. Not while you're wearing your shirt from yesterday. He set the bowl on the washstand. Then he helped her free the injured arm from the cut sleeve and button a clean shirt over the sling. He did it without making her feel like a patient, though neither of them spoke while he worked. I shouldn't have carried the board, she said. No, you could pretend to think about it. I thought about it yesterday. She ate the oatmeal. It had too much brown sugar. Norman moved the chair near the window and sat down. We need to talk about the rest. I know what the list says. The list says wiring, plumbing, rear exit, plaster, smoke protection, and foundation drainage. It doesn't say you have money for any of it. The order only requires stabilization. For now. Teresa looked around room 8. The desk lamp was off because the extension cord had been disconnected during rain. Her blanket, 1 suitcase, and the covered bowl were the only signs that someone lived there. If I meet the order, I can delay demolition, she said. Yes. And then what? Norman rubbed his palms over his knees. That's your question. Until then, Teresa's answer had been simple. Keep the building standing long enough to learn why Ronald protected room 12. If it held nothing useful, she could sell the property with a secure roof and recover part of what she had spent. If it held something meaningful, she could decide what to do after she saw it. That plan had made Maple House temporary, a problem to survive, a wall to understand, an answer Ronald had failed to give her while he was alive. Now nearly all her money was in the roof, and her arm was strapped to her chest. Leaving would not return either one. Norman looked toward the hall. This was a working house once. You said it was a boarding house. That's not the same thing. What do you mean? Rooms weren't fancy. People came because they needed a door that locked and a place to make coffee. Men from the mills stayed here. Women starting over after a husband died stayed here. Traveling nurses. Divorced people waiting for apartments. Nobody asked them to explain their whole life before handing over a key. How do you know? My brother stayed in room 6 after his marriage ended. I stayed here for a month when the machine shop closed. Teresa had not known that. Were you the caretaker then? Not yet. I paid weekly. Ronald bought the building later. Norman stood and walked to the doorway. Rooms are small, but the hall is wide. First floor doors could be widened. Kitchens large enough for shared meals. Plumbing runs close to every room because they had washstands. You've thought about this. I've had years to look at it. Why didn't you tell Ronald? I did. Teresa waited. He said he wanted to repair it properly. Then something always came first. Work, money, family, his health. The familiar order hurt because Teresa had helped maintain it. When Ronald postponed a trip to Claremont, she accepted his reason. When he said Gary needed help or Carolyn was worried about trust expenses, Teresa did not ask what his own plans were. She had wanted peace at home. Often, Peace meant allowing the loudest concern to go first. She had participated in Maple House remaining unfinished. That did not make Carolyn and Gary right. It did make Teresa responsible for what she chose now. Would people still use rooms like these? She asked. If they were safe? Older people, especially them? Some don't need nursing. They need affordable rent, a handrail, and somebody who notices when the kitchen light stays on all night. Teresa looked at the floor plan. The city sketch showed 11 rooms. She began marking which ones could eventually have wider doors, which shared plumbing walls, and which were close to the kitchen. Norman watched without interrupting. I don't want a shelter, Teresa said. I don't know how to run one. Then don't. I could run lodging. I know bills, groceries, repairs, laundry, and people who say they're fine when they aren't. You also know when to make them sign for missing papers. Teresa gave him a look. He smiled. Gary told me while you were at the clinic. He came by with your winter clothes. The bags were stacked in the office. On top sat a note from Gary saying Carolyn would contact her about the remaining items. Teresa ignored the note. She drew a line around room 8, room 6, the kitchen, and the first floor bathroom. Stabilizing the house isn't enough, she said. No. If I only keep it from demolition, Carolyn and Gary will wait for me to run out of money. Probably. And if room 12 is empty? Norman looked at her carefully. Then you still own a house with a new roof. Teresa folded the city sketch and placed it in her notebook. Her objective had changed without ceremony. She no longer wanted merely to survive the 90 days or recover what she had spent. She wanted Maple House safe enough to become useful again. Room 12 might help explain Ronald. It might even help pay for repairs. But it would not decide whether the rest of the house deserved a future. That afternoon, she called Lauren. The roof is secure, Teresa said. Not finished, but no water is getting in. Do you want to schedule the opening? Not yet. Lauren sounded surprised. What changed? I need a proper plan. I want photographs, measurements, and someone ready to protect whatever is behind the bricks. Even if it's only wallpaper, that will take time. I have a little. And money, almost none. Lauren was quiet. I can return and help document the opening, she said. I can also bring basic protective materials from the museum. That isn't an institutional commitment, I understand. When? After the roof is finished and my shoulder works well enough to be present. You don't need to remove the masonry yourself. I need to be able to point. Lauren laughed softly. Fair. Teresa ended the call and found Norman in the attic, checking for leaks. She told him the room would remain closed until they had a controlled way to enter. Then she showed him the first rough plan for Maple House, not as a condemned property or a hidden room, but as a working boarding house with safe rooms, shared meals, and doors people could lock from the inside. Norman spread the sketch across the attic floor and held down one corner with his flashlight. You've put a workshop in the old laundry area, he said. There's a separate entrance. There's no floor. There will be. And you put yourself in 8. It's dry. It's on the second floor. I can still use stairs. You're planning accessible rooms for other people while giving yourself a staircase. I'm planning the cheapest room for myself. Norman studied her face, then drew a small circle around room 3. First floor, near the bathroom. Once the chimney leak is repaired, this should be yours. I didn't ask you to redesign it. You asked whether the plan worked. Teresa took back the pencil. She did not erase the circle. The next morning, she began with the front door. Anyone entering Maple House had to use the pantry, step across a damaged porch, and pass through the kitchen. That was manageable for workers. It was not a proper entrance for inspectors, future residents, or anyone carrying groceries in winter. Norman removed the swollen door from its hinges. The lower corner had absorbed years of water. They set it across 2 sawhorses in the yard. Teresa's shoulder was improving, but she kept the sling on while working. She used her left hand to scrape loose paint. Norman cut away the rotten edge and fitted new wood. They worked in short stretches because he could not remain bent over for long, and she could not hold the door steady with both arms. At noon, Teresa called the city office. She did not ask whether someone could give her more time. She asked for the exact requirements of a stabilization review. The clerk read from the order. Roof made weather-tight, unsafe rear access blocked, front entry secured, open windows covered or repaired, structural braces documented, yard access maintained for emergency crews. When those are done, I request inspection, Teresa asked. Yes. And if they pass? The demolition referral is suspended while rehabilitation continues. The building remains unfit for occupancy. How long is the suspension? As long as approved work continues and you meet the follow-up dates. Teresa wrote down every word. What is the first follow-up? A written repair schedule within 30 days after stabilization. That became the next deadline. She printed the requirements at the public library and taped them to the office wall. Beneath them, she made 3 columns. Required now, required later, desired. Room 12 did not appear in the first column. It did not appear in the second. Teresa wrote it under desired, then crossed out the word. She created a 4th column, protect. The roofing crew finished the shingles and flashing on Thursday. New gutters carried a brief afternoon shower into the cleared drain. No water entered the attic. Norman photographed each brace with a measuring stick beside it. Teresa labeled the pictures and printed them at a pharmacy. The crew gave her copies of paid invoices and a statement describing the replaced boards. Her shoulder prevented her from doing much of the physical work, so she did what she had done for years at home. She organized the people who could. She tracked materials, compared prices, made lunch, returned calls, and noticed what everyone else forgot. The difference was that nobody called those things helping. At Maple House, they were management. The rear porch could not be repaired within budget. Norman removed the door handle from inside and bolted a sheet of plywood across the opening. Teresa painted exit closed in large letters. It was ugly, clear, and compliant. They repaired the front door with a metal threshold and a new lock. The transom glass remained loose, so Norman removed it, wrapped it in blankets, and filled the opening with plywood until it could be reset. When the door went back on its hinges, Teresa tested the key. It turned without resistance. She opened the door, stepped onto the porch, then came back inside and locked it behind her. One entrance, Norman said. One entrance that works. It counts. It does. The next practical problem was water. The city had shut it off at the street after a pipe burst in the kitchen. A plumber inspected the visible lines and found the break beneath the sink. Most of the main supply was usable, though fixtures on the upper floors would need replacement before they could be connected. Teresa could afford only the kitchen and first-floor bathroom. She approved that work. 2 days later, she turned the kitchen faucet. Air coughed from the pipe. Rust-colored water spat into the porcelain sink, then cleared. Norman held a glass beneath the stream. Don't drink it yet. I know. They let the water run while Teresa wiped the counter. The sink still rested on blocks, but it drained. The toilet flushed. For the first time since she entered Maple House, she could wash her hands without opening a bottle. She cleaned the kitchen over 3 days. Not the whole kitchen. The unsafe cabinet stayed closed, and the damaged corner near the old sink legs remained marked. She scrubbed 1 preparation table, 2 shelves, and the iron stove, though the stove was not connected. Norman repaired a cabinet door and mounted a rack for tools. Teresa set the electric kettle beside the working outlet. She placed 3 mugs on the clean shelf. Ronald's shaving mug stayed upstairs. It was not for coffee. On Monday morning, Lauren returned with acid-free paper, cotton gloves, plastic sheeting, and a camera stand. She brought no conservator because there was nothing visible to conserve yet. Teresa showed her the 4-column workboard. You've been busy, Lauren said. I've been sitting more than I'd like. You've still been busy. They planned the opening without opening anything. Norman would remove plaster around the existing doorway lines. A masonry worker would assess whether the brick supported weight before a single brick came out. Lauren would document each stage. Teresa would inventory every visible object before anyone crossed the threshold. If the room is empty, this will feel excessive, Norman said. Lauren folded a sheet of protective paper. If it isn't, it will feel necessary. Teresa added another rule. No object would leave Maple House until ownership and significance were clear. Lauren looked toward her. Do you have the deed? Teresa brought the certified copy from the office. Lauren read the transfer sentence. Building and all contents. That's how I read it. It's plain language. Ronald asked for it. Do Carolyn and Gary know this sentence is here? They signed the settlement papers. I don't know what they read. Lauren handed the deed back. Keep copies somewhere else. Teresa had already made 3. 1 was in her handbag. 1 was with her friend whose couch she had used. 1 was sealed in an envelope beneath the spare tire of her station wagon. The original certified copy remained in a locking metal box in the office. That afternoon, the city inspector arrived for the stabilization review. He checked the roof from the attic, tested the front door, examined the blocked rear exit, and compared Norman's braces with the photographs. He did not admire the clean kitchen or ask about the sealed room. Those things were not his function. At the front porch, he made one final note. "The demolition referral will be suspended," he said. "You'll receive the written follow-up date." Teresa held her notebook against her chest. "The repair schedule is due 30 days after today?" "Correct." "And occupancy is still prohibited?" "Correct." He removed the old deadline sheet from the front door and replaced it with a notice stating that stabilization work had been accepted and rehabilitation remained active. Then he left. Teresa stood on the porch after his car drove away. The new notice was not permission to live there, and it did not make the house safe, but the city was no longer counting down to demolition. Norman came outside carrying the electric kettle. "Coffee," he said. They sat on the front steps, using the 3 clean mugs from the kitchen. Lauren stayed because Teresa had made enough for her, too. People passing on Maple Street could see the new roof. They could see the cleared side yard and the front door hanging straight. One neighbor slowed to read the updated notice. Another called from the sidewalk that the house looked better. Teresa thanked them without explaining what she planned. The success gave her 30 days to produce a repair schedule. It also made Maple House harder to dismiss as a ruin. The building now had a secure roof, working water on the first floor, a usable entrance, and an owner who had survived the first deadline. Gary called before Lauren finished her coffee. "I saw the city updated the notice," he said. "Yes." "You paid for all that?" "Yes." "How?" "That's my business." He was quiet. Teresa could hear traffic through his phone. "Carolyn says Dad's trust should be informed before you do anything to the sealed room. The trust doesn't own the room. We don't know that. I do. You don't even know what's in there. Neither do you. That's why nobody should start tearing down walls." Teresa looked at Lauren, who was showing Norman how to place a scale marker beside an object for photographs. They were preparing carefully, not tearing down anything. "When I open it," Teresa said, "the doorway will be documented. The masonry will be assessed. Lauren will be present. So will Norman. You've made a whole plan without talking to us." "Yes." Gary seemed to have no answer for that. For 25 years, Teresa had included Carolyn and Gary in nearly every family choice because they were Ronald's children. Holiday dates, hospital visits, birthday meals, even the disposal of a broken dining chair had become family discussions. Maple House was the first important decision she had made without leaving space for their approval. "I need to go," she said. "Carolyn's coming over. I didn't invite her. She thinks this needs to be handled face to face." Teresa ended the call. Lauren began packing her materials. "Do you want me to stay?" "No. This isn't your argument?" Norman stood. "It may involve the house. Then stay for the house." 10 minutes later, Carolyn's car stopped at the curb. She got out carrying a leather folder and looked up at the new roof before she looked at Teresa. For the first time, Carolyn did not appear embarrassed by Maple House. She appeared afraid that Teresa might succeed. Carolyn crossed the street without closing her car door. "You had the city here," she said. "Yes. Gary called me from work. He said the demolition order was suspended. The referral was suspended. The house is still under rehabilitation." Carolyn looked at the updated notice. "You're making this sound official." "It is official. That isn't what I meant." Teresa remained on the porch. Norman stayed inside the front hall, close enough to hear, but not positioned like protection. Carolyn climbed the steps and lowered her voice. "I want to discuss this privately. Norman works here. Does he own the property? No? Then this doesn't involve him. It involves any work done to the house." Carolyn glanced through the open door. The new work light illuminated the hall. The fallen chair was gone. Tools rested neatly on a shelf. The brass keyboard had been cleaned, though its faded labels remained. "You've changed things," she said. "I've repaired things. Dad paid Norman, didn't he? That's between them. It was trust money. Do you know that?" Carolyn opened the leather folder. "The trust paid property taxes and some maintenance expenses for years. I have statements. Then you knew Ronald was maintaining Maple House. We knew bills came through. That doesn't mean we knew what he was doing here." Teresa stepped down one stair. "You called it forgotten. I said it was a liability. You let me believe nobody had paid attention to it." Carolyn closed the folder again. She had come prepared to discuss ownership, not honesty. "If Dad preserved something in this building," she said, "it may have been purchased or maintained with trust funds. You don't know that anything was preserved, neither do you. But a museum director doesn't drive here for old plaster. She came because Ronald contacted her years ago. That's exactly my concern. What is? That Dad's intentions may not be reflected in the transfer. Teresa looked at her. You prepared the transfer. We prepared it based on the understanding that this was an empty, condemned building. It isn't empty. We were told it contained abandoned furnishings and debris. It does. Carolyn's fingers tightened around the folder. You know what I mean? Teresa did know. Carolyn was not worried about old chairs in rooms 1 through 11. She was worried that Ronald had protected something she and Gary had failed to find before placing $5 on the conference table. What do you want? Teresa asked. A pause. For how long? Until the trust records can be reviewed. You have the records. Not all of Dad's personal notes. Some are missing. Teresa thought of the pages removed from Ronald's oldest notebook. What's missing? I don't know. That's why they're missing. It sounded ridiculous, but Carolyn said it with complete seriousness. You've had his office since the day he died, Teresa said. How much time do you need? A few weeks. The house has deadlines. The sealed room doesn't. The roof is secure. Lauren and Norman are ready. I'm not waiting a few weeks because you didn't read your own papers. Carolyn's face went pale. You're not the only person who lost him. I never said I was. You act as if Gary and I came into that office looking for ways to strip you of everything. Teresa did not answer. Carolyn's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Dad kept financial arrangements private. He told us the trust protected family property. He told you something else, apparently. He told me very little. Then why are you so certain? I'm certain you wanted this house gone until you saw a museum employee on the porch. That isn't fair. It's accurate. Carolyn walked back down the steps. At the sidewalk, she turned. If you open that wall before we review the records, the trust will challenge anything removed. On what basis? On the basis that Dad did not intend a $5 settlement to transfer a valuable collection. You don't know there's a collection. No, Carolyn said. But now neither of us can pretend there isn't a question. She drove away with the leather folder on the passenger seat. Norman came onto the porch after her car disappeared. She's scared, he said. So am I. Different kind. Teresa went inside and closed the repaired front door. The lock turned smoothly. That small success felt far away. Lauren called less than an hour later. Carolyn contacted the museum, she said. Teresa sat at the office desk. What did she tell you? That ownership of the sealed room's contents may be disputed by Ronald's family trust. Did she say what's inside? No, because she doesn't know. I told her that. Teresa could hear the care in Lauren's voice. It was the tone people used before delivering an answer they wished were different. You can't be present for the opening, Teresa said. Not in an official capacity. What about as Ronald's friend? I'm the museum's acquisitions director. I can't separate those roles when a possible acquisition is involved. You said you couldn't make a commitment. I still can't. But if I help direct an opening after receiving notice of a dispute, it could look as if the museum favored one claimant. Carolyn isn't a claimant. She gave me the house. I understand. No, you understand that she called first. Lauren accepted that without defending herself. I can give you the documentation photographs I took, she said. I can also provide written handling instructions that anyone can follow. But I have to withdraw from the opening until ownership is clear. The planned date disappeared with that sentence. So did Lauren's camera stand, archival materials, and experience. Will you still examine photographs afterward? Teresa asked. I can receive them as general information. I can't evaluate objects for acquisition until the dispute is resolved. What if the room is empty? Then there's nothing to dispute. And if it isn't? Lauren's silence answered. Teresa looked at Ronald's notebook. His careful entry had protected a wall for 22 years. It had not protected her from what happened when other people began to care about it. Send the handling instructions, she said. I'm sorry, I know. After the call, Teresa told Norman. He took off his cap and sat in the chair beside the desk. We can wait, he said. For what? Carolyn to finish looking through papers. She doesn't want an answer. She wants control of when the answer arrives. Then we get our own camera, and someone who understands masonry. I know a mason. Lauren said not to open without checking whether the brick carries weight. He can check. Teresa looked at the workboard. The roof was complete. The city had suspended demolition. Water ran in the kitchen. Those gains remained, yet the most careful part of her strategy had been removed by one phone call. She could open the room anyway. She could also leave it sealed and focus on the rehabilitation schedule. That would protect the house and avoid a fight. Carolyn and Gary might lose interest if nothing emerged, but Teresa knew they would not. The room had become valuable to them because it was unknown. Silence would not restore peace. It would only return decision-making to the people who had locked her papers away and called it responsible. Gary arrived near dusk. He did not knock. Teresa saw him through the office window and met him on the porch. "Carolyn says you refused to wait," he said. "She asked for weeks without giving a reason. The reason is probate. Ronald's estate has already been opened. That doesn't mean every asset is settled. You signed the settlement, based on what we knew." Teresa folded her arms carefully, keeping the right one low. "You knew the building had contents. Garbage, old furniture, that's still contents." Gary rubbed his thumb hard against his finger. "If you take something out of that room and sell it, we'll challenge the transfer. We'll say there was a material mistake. Will you?" "Yes." He wanted her to believe him. He also wanted the statement to frighten her before he had to pay anyone to put it on formal paper. "Did Carolyn bring you the trust records?" Teresa asked. "What?" "She said they show the trust paid expenses here." "It did." "Do they show what Ronald preserved?" "No." "Do they show that the trust owned Maple House after the settlement?" Gary looked away. "That isn't the point. It may become the point." He stepped closer. "You don't have money for a probate fight. You spent it on the roof." There it was. He knew the pressure that mattered. Teresa could survive anger. She could survive being called unreasonable. She could not afford months of legal bills. Gary lowered his voice. "Take my offer. I'll reimburse the repairs. I'll handle the city. You can rent somewhere decent and be done with this. And the room, I'll deal with it. How? That won't be your problem." Teresa thought about room 8, the pain in her shoulder, and the balance in her checking account. Gary's offer could buy relief. It could place her in a clean apartment with working heat before winter. Nobody would remove her for sleeping there. It would also return her future to someone who wanted the deed only after the house stopped looking worthless. "No," she said. Gary's expression hardened. "Then, don't say we didn't warn you." "I won't." He left without looking back at Maple House. Teresa found Norman in the kitchen rinsing the coffee mugs. She told him about the threatened challenge. "You still want to open it?" he asked. "Yes." "Without Lauren? With photographs, video, measurements, and a written inventory. We'll invite Carolyn and Gary to observe." Norman turned off the faucet. "They could interfere. They can stand in the hall. They won't touch anything. And if they refuse, we record that too." Teresa understood the price now. The deed could protect her only if she treated every item behind the wall as something that might later be examined in detail. There could be no quiet discovery, no private keepsake removed before anyone noticed, and no choice made simply because she was Ronald's widow. She would have to expose the room, her decisions, and the full extent of her risk. She took out a fresh sheet of paper and began writing the opening procedure. Norman read over her shoulder, adding tools and safety steps. At the bottom, Teresa wrote the date and a time. Then she prepared 2 identical notices, one for Carolyn and one for Gary, inviting them to witness the removal of the bricks after the masonry assessment. The post office clerk pressed a round stamp onto each certified mail receipt. Teresa watched the date appear in blue ink. One envelope was addressed to Carolyn, the other was addressed to Gary. Both contained the same invitation, the same safety instructions, and the same statement that the opening would be photographed from start to finish. "Return receipts?" the clerk asked. "Yes, that costs extra." "I know." Teresa paid and placed the receipt in her handbag beside the certified deed. Gary sent a message that afternoon. "I will not participate in an unauthorized opening." Carolyn's reply arrived by email and took 3 paragraphs to say the same thing. She called the proposed work reckless, repeated that trust records were under review, and demanded that Teresa preserve every object and document found. Teresa printed the email. Norman read it at the kitchen table. "She wants you to preserve the things she says you shouldn't uncover. She wants every possible answer, except the one where she's wrong." Teresa filed the email with Gary's message. "We preserve everything anyway." The mason came the next morning. He was a quiet man with a folding probe, a small inspection camera, and no interest in the family dispute. He examined the doorway lines, then went to the attic to see how the floor above was supported. Norman showed him the braces and the roofing photographs. The main load runs here, the mason said, pointing to a wall several feet from room 12. This infill is closing an opening. It isn't carrying the floor. Can it come out from the hall? Teresa asked. Yes. Slowly. Brick by brick from the top center. Don't strike through it. Could the inner face fall into the room? Not if whoever laid it did decent work. I can't promise what's on the other side. He drilled one narrow hole into the mortar, not the brick, and inserted the camera. The passage was too tight and too dark to reveal the room. It showed only a shallow gap behind the masonry and what appeared to be another wooden surface. A panel? Norman asked. Maybe protective sheathing. Maybe the back of old trim. Can you remove the bricks? Teresa asked. I can start the opening and show you the safe pattern. You and Mr. Butler can continue if the wall stays stable. His price was modest, but it still came from money Teresa needed for food. She hired him for the first morning hour. Before he left, he wrote on the work plan that the infill was non-structural and could be removed under controlled conditions. One uncertainty was gone. Opening the doorway would not bring down the second floor. The larger uncertainty sat behind it. Teresa spent the next day arranging a legal consultation. She had called 3 offices before finding one willing to review the settlement and deed for a fixed fee. The appointment was in a plain office above a bank. The waiting room held 2 vinyl chairs, a coat rack, and a machine that made coffee 1 paper cup at a time. The attorney read the settlement first. Then she compared its property schedule with the recorded deed. Who drafted the original transfer language? She asked. The trust's attorney said he used Ronald's property instructions. And Carolyn and Gary signed as trustees? Yes. You signed the release in the same meeting? Yes. Was the $5 paid? In cash. It's noted on the receipt page. The attorney turned to the clause Teresa had read at the conference table. The building, fixtures, records, tools, furniture, materials, and all other contents remaining on the premises, she said. That is broad. Does it mean what it sounds like? It means the property and its contents were conveyed to you. Even if something inside is valuable, the language doesn't set a value limit. Teresa kept her hands still in her lap. Gary says they'll claim a material mistake. They can make that claim. Anyone can threaten a claim. Can they win? I can't promise an outcome. They might argue that both sides believed the contents were worthless. You would answer that their own deed expressly transferred those contents, and they had control of the property before signing. They didn't inspect all of it. Was that because you prevented them? No. Did you know what was behind the wall? No. Did anyone tell you it held something valuable before the settlement? No. The attorney nodded. Then you did not conceal known value from them. That matters. She made a copy of the certified deed and checked the county recording information. It was properly recorded, she said. The trust is listed as grantor. You are listed as owner. The contents clause is in the recorded instrument, not merely in a side letter. Teresa felt her shoulders lower, though the right one still resisted movement. What should I do before opening the room? Document its condition. Invite the people who threatened a claim, which you've done. Use neutral witnesses. Don't remove, sell, clean, or alter anything until you know what it is. Keep every expense record. What if they come and try to stop the work? Unless they obtain a court order, they don't control access to your building. Teresa absorbed that. Would a letter from you stop them threatening me? No. The honesty helped. What would it do? It would tell them you've received independent advice and intend to rely on the deed. Sometimes that reduces noise. Sometimes it increases it. How much would the letter cost? The attorney told her. Teresa thought of the kitchen repair schedule, the first floor bathroom, and the food money already reduced by the mason's visit. No letter, she said. Not yet. The attorney gathered the pages into a neat stack. There's one more practical issue. If you discover historically significant material, an institution may want proof of ownership before engaging. They already do. I can prepare a short opinion limited to the recorded deed. It won't bind a court, but it will state that the county record identifies you as owner of the building and its existing contents. How much? Included in today's fee. Teresa accepted. The written opinion arrived the next afternoon. It did not praise Teresa or criticize Ronald's children. It quoted the transfer clause, confirmed the signatures and recording, and stopped there. Teresa sent it to Lauren with the deed and the certified mail receipts. Lauren called before the day ended. The museum reviewed the documents, she said. Because no legal action or court order exists, I'm permitted to observe and document the opening. Will you come? Yes, with limits. I won't make an acquisition decision that day. I won't remove anything. If there's material requiring a conservator, we stop. That's what I want. Did Carolyn and Gary respond? They refused to participate. Do you want to postpone once more? No. Lauren let out a quiet breath. Then, Monday morning. After the call, Teresa found Norman repairing the latch on room 3. He had removed the damaged ceiling plaster and covered the dry opening with clean plywood. The room was far from finished, but it no longer smelled wet. Lauren's coming, Teresa said. Good. The deed was reviewed. It covers the contents. Better. It doesn't stop them from challenging. Nothing stops people talking except sleep, and some manage it then too. Teresa sat in the straight-back chair while Norman fitted the latch. We need another witness, she said. The mason will be here for 1 hour. I can set the camera on a stand after he leaves. I want the whole room recorded before either of us enters. Norman tested the latch. Then we do that. He had made no demand on whatever they might find. That became more noticeable as Carolyn and Gary demanded more. Teresa asked, Why did you keep coming after Ronald stopped paying you? Norman did not answer immediately. I didn't keep coming regular, he said. Once every few weeks, after storms. Why? Roof doesn't care whether a check cleared. That isn't an answer. It's enough of one. Teresa let him keep the rest. They spent the weekend preparing. Lauren sent a list. Clean cotton sheets, unprinted paper, soft brushes, nitrile gloves, numbered cards, a ruler, flashlights that did not heat up. Teresa bought only what they lacked. Norman built a simple camera stand from scrap wood. Teresa tested the view from the hallway. It captured the entire doorway and the hands of anyone working there. They hung plastic across the nearby doors to keep masonry dust from spreading. Teresa marked a clean area in room 8 for temporary inspection, though nothing would be carried there without Lauren's approval. Carolyn's return receipt arrived Saturday. Gary's arrived Monday morning before the mason came. Both envelopes had been accepted. They knew the time. Norman suggested parking the work truck across the side gate so nobody could enter unexpectedly. No, Teresa said. They were invited. They may come to interfere. Then we record that. He set down the wheel chalk. You could have told the newspaper. Family tries to reclaim mystery room from widow. People would enjoy that. I don't need people to enjoy it. It would make Carolyn careful. It would make her ashamed in public. That isn't the same as careful. Norman looked at her for a moment, then put the chalk back in his toolbox. Teresa did not want humiliation as protection. Carolyn and Gary had caused enough of it already. She would not build her ownership on the same thing. At 8:30 Monday morning, Lauren placed numbered evidence cards on the office desk. The mason covered the hallway floor. Norman checked the camera battery and started the recording. No silver vehicle appeared on Maple Street. At 8:55, Teresa called Carolyn and put the phone on speaker. We're beginning at 9, she said when Carolyn answered. You're still welcome to observe. Carolyn's voice was tight. I told you our position. I know. If you proceed, our relationship will not recover from this. Teresa looked at the plastered doorway. Their relationship had survived by asking very little of Carolyn. Teresa had cooked, yielded, waited, and accepted being treated as an addition to Ronald's family. Proceeding would end that arrangement, even if something better never replaced it. I'm not asking you to approve, Teresa said. I'm making sure you know the door is open to you. That door has been sealed for a reason. Yes, Teresa said. I'm going to find out why. She ended the call. The mason set his chisel against the mortar above the tarnished number 12. Lauren raised the camera. Norman stood beside the covered floor with an empty crate for the first bricks. Teresa signed the opening log, accepted that the old family piece was finished, and gave the mason permission to begin. The first tap loosened a white line of dust. The mason worked across the upper joint, striking lightly and stopping often. Norman lifted each brick after it came free and placed it in the crate. Lauren photographed the exposed mortar, the wooden frame, and every layer of paint. Teresa stood where the camera could see her. Her right arm was out of the sling, but she kept it close to her side. After 6 bricks, a dark gap appeared. The mason held his inspection light against it. There's wood behind the wall, about 4 inches back. Can you see around it? Lauren asked. No. He removed 2 more bricks. The wood proved to be a protective panel fitted inside the old doorway. Its surface was clean compared with the masonry. Ronald didn't just close this, Norman said. He built a shield. By 10, the opening was large enough to expose the panel's upper edge. The mason checked the frame again, showed Norman where to continue, and left. Teresa signed his work note before he went. Norman removed bricks one at a time. Teresa numbered the crates. Lauren documented each row. Nobody hurried. Near noon, the entire panel was visible. It had been screwed to a simple inner frame. A rubber strip ran around its edges. No watermarks, Lauren said. Norman removed the screws. The panel remained in place. Maybe stuck to the seal, he said. Teresa moved closer. Can it come toward us? It should. They attached 2 temporary handles through existing holes. Norman pulled one, while Teresa used her left hand on the other. The seal released with a low tearing sound. Cool, dry air entered the hallway. The panel moved forward. Behind it stood a closed wooden door. Its varnish had darkened, but the surface was unbroken. A brass knob sat beneath an oval key plate. The number 12 had been painted on the center panel in small black figures. Norman stared at it. That's what I remembered. Lauren photographed the door before anyone touched it. The knob turned. Teresa looked at Norman, then at Lauren. Both waited for her. She opened the door inward. The room beyond was dark. Heavy paper covered the windows from inside, and cloth lay over every piece of furniture. The air smelled of dry wood and old fabric, not mold. Lauren raised one hand. Nobody enters yet. She placed the camera on its stand and aimed it through the doorway. Norman brought 2 work lights, setting them in the hall so their heat remained outside. Under the white covers, the room seemed occupied by quiet shapes. Teresa felt no sudden certainty. She did not know whether they were valuable. She knew only that Ronald had protected them with more care than he had explained to anyone. Lauren stepped across the threshold first in clean shoe covers. Teresa followed. Norman remained at the doorway until Lauren told him where to stand. They removed the window paper without opening the sash. Daylight spread gradually across the room. The largest covered shape was a bed. Beside it stood a washstand with a marble top. A tall wardrobe occupied one wall. There was also a writing desk, a small table, 6 chairs of different purposes, a blanket chest, 2 frame mirrors, and a narrow bench beneath the windows. Every piece carried the same carved maple leaf detail. Lauren uncovered only enough wood to examine a chair back. Don't clean this. I wasn't going to, Teresa said. I know. I'm saying it because I need to hear myself say it. Norman lifted the cloth from the desk with both hands. Dust lay on the cover, but almost none had reached the polished surface beneath. Inside the desk were rolled paper patterns tied with cotton tape. The first showed the curve of the chair legs. The next carried full-size drawings for the wardrobe doors and washstand. A shallow drawer held photographs mounted on stiff cards. The room appeared in them exactly as it stood now, though the walls were brighter and the floor newly finished. Men in aprons posed beside the furniture. Another photograph showed the front of Maple House before the maple trees had grown tall. Teresa turned each card over. Dates, measurements, and brief notes had been written in more than one hand. The blanket chest contained receipt books, furniture orders, and old boarding house ledgers wrapped in brown paper. Lauren read only the first few pages before sitting back on her heels. This wasn't a tenant room, she said. Norman looked around. Then why number it? It was a sample room. The receipts supplied the answer in ordinary ink. Maple House's first owner had operated a small furniture workshop behind the boarding house. Prospective customers were shown room 12 as a complete furnished interior. They could order a bed alone, a match set, or furniture for an entire rented room. The boarding ledgers listed payments for rooms 1 through 11. Room 12 never had a tenant. Later, orders stopped. The workshop closed. Pieces disappeared from other parts of the house, but the sample room remained together. At the bottom of the chest, Teresa found a modern storage box. Ronald's handwriting covered the label. Maple House. Room 12. Inventory and provenance. Sealed after documentation. Inside were copies of every photograph, typed descriptions of each object, repair notes, and a record of where Ronald had found missing receipts in local archives. He had documented maker marks beneath the chairs, joinery inside the drawers, and small differences showing which craftsperson had completed each piece. A final page explained why he had sealed the room. The roof was worsening. Thieves had entered twice. Ronald believed the matched interior would lose its historical meaning if the furniture was scattered among dealers and private buyers. He had not written a letter to Teresa. He had not promised her money or described what she should do. He had preserved the room and placed the contents clause in the property instructions. That was his intention in the form Ronald understood best. He had made the thing survive. He had left the next decision to whoever legally held the building. Lauren finished reading and looked at Teresa. "I need a conservator. How soon?" "Today, if I can arrange it." The room was closed again, though not bricked. Norman fitted a temporary lock to the inner door. Teresa kept the only key. The conservator arrived the following morning. She examined the suite over 2 full days. She used magnification, measured the oxidation on hidden metal, compared saw marks, and studied the joints inside the desk and wardrobe. She tested a tiny area of finish beneath the blanket chest where any mark would remain unseen. The wood was consistent across the suite. The aging matched the documented period. Maker marks on the furniture corresponded with names in the order books. Repairs recorded by Ronald appeared exactly where his inventory placed them. Nothing had been assembled recently. Nothing important had been substituted. The conservator's written finding described the suite as an unusually complete boarding house sample interior with its working patterns, photographs, receipts, and business records intact. Lauren read the report in the Maple House kitchen. "I've never seen this much context survive with a furnished room," she said. "What does that mean in money?" Teresa asked. "It means I can take a proposal to the museum. What does it mean for this house?" Lauren looked toward the ceiling. Room 12 stood directly above them. The room explains the furniture. The furniture explains the room. If most of the collection goes to the museum, several pieces could remain here under an agreement. We would reproduce the room arrangement in an exhibit and credit Maple House as its source. Teresa did not commit. "Bring me the proposal." It came 6 days later. Lauren arrived carrying a sealed envelope and a formal inventory. Norman washed 3 mugs while she spread the documents across the kitchen table. The museum offered $420,000 for most of the matched furniture suite, the original patterns, selected photographs, receipts, and Ronald's preservation inventory. Teresa could retain the writing desk, 2 chairs, the blanket chest, and 1 mirror for the restored room 12. The museum would provide professional removal and copies of all records. Teresa read the amount twice. It could pay for wiring, plumbing, fire protection, structural work, accessible rooms, and the workshop. It could give her savings again. It could keep Maple House standing without asking Carolyn or Gary for anything. Lauren pointed to the signature line. "You don't have to decide today." A car door closed outside, then another. Carolyn entered first. Gary followed with the leather folder Teresa had seen before. Neither had been invited that day. Carolyn stopped when she saw Lauren at the table. Her gaze moved to the museum inventory, then to the offer. "You opened it," she said. "Yes." "What was inside?" Teresa placed the conservator's report beside the photographs. Carolyn read the first page while Gary stood over her shoulder. When she reached the description of the complete suite, her face changed. Gary picked up the offer. $420,000? "That is the museum's offer," Lauren said. "For furniture? For the collection and supporting archive." Gary looked at Teresa. "You knew?" "No, you knew there was something valuable. I knew Ronald protected a wall. You paid $5 for this building." "Yes." Carolyn closed the report. "Dad never intended this collection to leave the family trust." Teresa waited. "He used trust funds to maintain the property," Carolyn continued. "He worked with the museum through family preservation activities. The room was part of that work." "Do you have a paper saying the trust owns the collection?" Teresa asked. The collection was inside a trust property. It was inside Maple House. At the time, Dad documented it. Gary put both hands on the table. The settlement was based on a condemned building with abandoned contents. "That is what everybody understood. That is what you understood," Teresa said. "You understood it too." "Yes." "Then this is a mutual mistake." Carolyn turned to Lauren. "The museum cannot buy disputed family property from Teresa alone." Lauren did not reach for the offer. "The museum reviewed the recorded deed before I returned. The deed transfers the building." Teresa went to the office and brought back the certified copy. Carolyn watched her place it on the table. "The house was your final settlement," Carolyn said. "Not Dad's preservation work. The transfer says what the settlement included. Teresa opened the deed to the marked paragraph and slid it across the table. Carolyn read silently. Gary leaned closer. What? She did not answer. He took the page and read the sentence himself. The property, fixtures, records, furniture, tools, materials, and all other contents remaining on the premises had transferred to Teresa. Their signatures appeared beneath it as co-trustees. Gary's face reddened. Philip wrote this. Philip said Ronald's property file instructed him to include the contents, Teresa said. That doesn't mean a collection worth this amount. The deed doesn't say worthless contents. Carolyn sat down. She had committed fully to the belief that Ronald's valuable work remained with the trust. Now the same settlement she had used to remove Teresa from the family assets established the opposite. Lauren spoke carefully. The museum's ownership review found the recorded language sufficient for us to deal directly with Teresa. Gary looked at Norman. You knew about this room. I knew the number, Norman said. I never saw inside until Teresa did. You helped her hide it. We invited you to the opening. Gary had no answer. Carolyn read the clause again. We can still challenge. You can, Teresa said. But you'll be challenging the deed you prepared, the property you controlled, and the contents you chose not to inspect. Gary pushed the offer away. Teresa did not raise her voice. She did not point out the $5 bill or ask whether the demolition costs still worried him. She had no need to make the moment smaller for them in order to make herself larger. This offer stays with me, she said. Room 12 stays locked until I decide what remains here. Nothing leaves today. Carolyn looked up. And us? That decision isn't in the deed. The kitchen fell quiet. Teresa gathered the museum papers, placed them in the locking box, and turned the key. For the first time since Ronald died, Carolyn and Gary had no access Teresa had not chosen to give them. So that's it? Gary asked. You keep everything? Teresa left the key in the lock. I decide what happens to property I own. Dad's work made it valuable. Yes? And you think he meant us to get nothing? I don't know what Ronald meant you to get. I know what you kept. Carolyn flinched. Gary did not. He walked to the front window and looked toward the street. I've got obligations you don't know about. Teresa knew enough. Gary's calls to Ronald had become more frequent during the final year. They usually came late in the evening. Ronald would close the kitchen door, speak quietly, then sit at the table afterward with a calculator. Your obligations don't belong to Maple House, she said. I'm not asking for the house. You asked for the deed. I offered to pay you. When you thought the room might matter. Gary turned. I was trying to keep this in the family. Teresa looked around the damaged kitchen. I was family when the roof leaked too. Norman lowered his eyes. Lauren remained still beside the table. Carolyn gathered the trust papers into her folder. We should go. Gary did not move. You could split the money. No, 3 ways. No. You don't need $420,000. The house does. He laughed once without humor. You're going to pour it into this place. I'm going to make it safe. For strangers, for people who need rooms. And that matters more than helping us? Teresa felt the old pressure to explain herself until Gary approved. She let it pass. This conversation is over. Gary looked at Carolyn. Say something. Carolyn held the leather folder against her chest. The deed says what it says. You signed it too. I know. That was not accountability. It was recognition, and it had arrived only when denial stopped working. Gary left through the front door and slammed it hard enough to rattle the temporary board above the transom. Norman checked the frame. Carolyn stayed. Dad should have told us, she said. He should have told all of us many things. We believed the trust was his plan. It was one of his plans. Carolyn looked toward the ceiling. He let us give it away. He made sure you could. The distinction mattered. Ronald had not secretly changed ownership after death. He had left instructions for a property his children did not want. Carolyn and Gary had chosen the $5 settlement because it moved cost and risk away from the trust. Carolyn's eyes settled on Teresa's shoulder. Are you still hurt? Yes. You shouldn't have been doing this alone. I wasn't alone. Norman kept his attention on the transom. Carolyn understood the answer. She had not been excluded from the work. She had chosen not to join it. I'll contact you after we review our options, she said. Contact me in writing. Carolyn nodded and left. Lauren waited until her car had gone. Do you want to withdraw from the offer process? She asked. No. You don't have to decide while this is fresh. It isn't fresh. The amount is fresh. The decision isn't. Teresa unlocked the metal box and removed the museum papers. She retained the writing desk, 2 chairs, the blanket chest, and 1 mirror. She also required full photographic copies of every record leaving Maple House. The room itself, its original trim, and the painted number 12 would remain with the building. Lauren added those terms to the agreement. Teresa signed the next day after the museum confirmed them. Payment would be made after professional packing and transfer. The conservator supervised every item. Nothing left through the broken side entrance. Each piece passed through the repaired front door. The bed came first, disassembled only at its original joints. Then the wardrobe, washstand, tables, bench, and remaining chairs. Every part carried a numbered tag. Lauren checked each number against the inventory before it entered the museum truck. Teresa stood inside room 12 while the bed frame was lifted away. Pale rectangles on the floor showed where the furniture had rested for decades. The removal hurt more than she expected. The collection had been visible to her for such a short time, yet Ronald had preserved it for 22 years. Watching it leave felt like opening a letter and giving away the pages. Lauren noticed. "The suite will remain together," she said. "I know. You can visit it. I know that too." Teresa was not sorry about the sale. She was allowed to feel the cost anyway. The pieces she kept were moved to the center of the room and covered. The blanket chest still held copies of the boarding ledgers. The desk held copies of the patterns and Ronald's complete inventory. When the museum truck pulled away, Norman closed the front door gently. The payment cleared 3 business days later. Teresa did not celebrate. She paid the roofing balance, the clinic bill, the electrician, the plumber, the legal consultation, and Norman. He returned the check. "What's wrong with it?" she asked. "Too much. It covers the work you did before there was money. I didn't submit hours. I kept them. Of course you did." Teresa put the check back in his shirt pocket. "Ronald paid you to protect Maple House. I'm paying you for helping bring it back." Norman removed the check again. "Then write caretaker on the note line." "No. What's wrong with caretaker? You're not here to watch a ruin. What am I?" Teresa pointed toward the old laundry area on the plan. "Workshop manager if you want it. I'm 79. You keep reminding me. I'm not managing employees. There aren't any. What would I teach? Repairs people can do without pretending they're younger than they are." Norman considered that. "I'd need a proper bench. It's on the plan. And good lights. Also on the plan." He folded the check and returned it to his pocket. "All right," he said. "But I choose the bench height." The first major contracts were signed within 2 weeks. Electrical wiring came before finished walls. Fire alarms and a sprinkler line came before furniture. The rear porch was removed, and plans for a safe replacement were approved. Room 3 received priority, so Teresa could move to the first floor when the work reached that section. The money created choices, but it did not make the house cheap. Every repaired wall exposed a pipe or wire that had waited too long. Teresa kept a reserve account and refused additions that did not serve safety, access, or daily use. Her shoulder improved through therapy, though it never returned to what it had been. She learned to stop before pain made the decision for her. Norman learned to ask for help with anything that required kneeling more than a few minutes. Gary sent no written claim. He sent one message asking whether Teresa had reconsidered helping with his obligations. She replied that she had not. He did not answer. Carolyn remained silent for 12 days. Then her car appeared on Maple Street. She waited outside the gate until Teresa came to the porch. "I brought something," she said. 2 file boxes sat in her trunk. "What is it?" "Dad's Maple House papers. Invoices, photographs, correspondence. They were mixed with trust records. Did you make copies?" "Yes." "Are you claiming they belong to the trust?" "No." Teresa walked to the car but did not lift either box. Carolyn took the first one. Norman came from the side yard and carried the second. Inside the office, Carolyn placed her box beside the desk. She did not open drawers or touch the locking metal case. "There are personal letters too," she said. "Some mention the museum. I didn't read all of them." Teresa believed she had read enough. "Why bring these now? Because they belong with the building." That was action. It did not repair the change locks, the trash bags, or the conference table. It did not return Teresa's place in the home she had shared with Ronald. But Carolyn had surrendered access to papers she might have kept for leverage. Teresa opened the top box. The folders were labeled in Ronald's careful hand. None changed the ownership of room 12. Most contained ordinary maintenance, photographs, and plans he never completed. I also brought the rest of your winter clothes, Carolyn said, and your laptop charger, thank you. Carolyn stood near the door. Can I see the room? Not today. Her face tightened, then relaxed. All right. You can make an appointment after the work area is safe. Will you let Gary come, if he asks me himself and agrees to the same boundaries? Carolyn nodded. At the porch, she paused. I'm sorry. Teresa did not make the apology larger than it was. I heard you, she said. Carolyn walked to her car alone. Inside, Norman had already opened the second box. On top lay a photograph of Ronald standing in the Maple House hall, younger and heavier, with one hand resting beside the uncovered number 12. Teresa placed the photograph in a clean sleeve. Then she filed it with the room records and returned to the kitchen, where the electrician was waiting for her decision about the new hall lights. The electrician offered her two choices for the hallway fixtures. One had clear glass and threw sharp white light. The other had shallow cream shades that softened the bulbs without making the stairs difficult to see. The second ones, Teresa said. They cost a little more. Can they use the same wiring? Yes. Then the second ones. He marked the order sheet. For the next 4 months, Maple House sounded different every week. Hammers gave way to drills. Drills gave way to sanders. Water ran through new pipes. The old wiring came out in brittle lengths, and bright copper went into the walls. Teresa moved from room 8 to room 3 when the first floor was ready. The room had a wide door, a level threshold, and a bathroom close by. She kept Ronald's desk lamp on the dresser. She finally unpacked both suitcases. Her clothes went into a repaired wardrobe that had no connection to the museum suite. Her wedding album went on the shelf. Ronald's shaving mug sat beside a small vase on the windowsill. She folded the empty suitcases and stored them beneath the bed. Room 12 took longer. Its wallpaper was cleaned, not replaced. Damaged sections were stabilized at the edges. The retained desk, 2 chairs, blanket chest, and mirror returned to their recorded positions. Lauren supplied full-size reproductions of several photographs, along with copies of the patterns and receipt pages. The room did not pretend the entire suite remained there. Small cards showed what had gone to the museum and why the pieces had been kept together. Lauren brought Teresa a draft of the museum's publicity material. The proposed headline read, "Widowed at 68, she bought a condemned boarding house for $5. Room 12 had never been leased." Teresa read it at the kitchen table. "It's accurate," Lauren said. "It sounds like I tripped over the whole thing. What would you call it? The Maple House sample room. That's less dramatic." It's also what the room was. Lauren smiled and crossed out the headline. The exhibit opened with Teresa's preferred name. Maple House was credited as the source, and Ronald's preservation inventory appeared beside the original patterns. Teresa attended the opening in a navy dress she had recovered from the house Carolyn controlled. Norman wore a jacket that was too warm for the room. Neither stayed for the entire reception. After half an hour, Norman leaned toward Teresa. "Too many people talking beside chairs nobody's allowed to sit in." Teresa agreed. They drove back to Claremont and ate sandwiches in the working Maple House kitchen. Carolyn made her first appointment to see room 12 on a Tuesday afternoon. She arrived 6 minutes early and waited on the porch until Teresa opened the door. "You could have come in," Teresa said. "You asked people to wait. I did." Carolyn had brought a bakery box and one more folder from Ronald's office. The folder contained old photographs of the Maple House porches and several receipts Norman had never seen. They went upstairs together. Carolyn stopped at the open doorway. The painted number 12 had been cleaned, but the tarnished brass numerals remained beside it under a small protective cover. Teresa had chosen not to polish them. Carolyn entered without touching anything. She looked at Ronald's inventory on the desk, then at the photograph of him standing in the hall. "He was doing all this while we thought he was wasting money," she said. "Yes, I asked him to sell this place more than once." "What did he say?" "That I didn't understand what it was." "Did you ask him to explain?" Carolyn looked at the empty space where the bed had stood. "No, I told him explanation wouldn't fix the roof." Teresa did not relieve her of that answer. After several minutes, Carolyn said, "I can help with the old invoices if you want. I know how Dad organized the trust files. That doesn't give you access to the deed box, I know. You work here at the office table. Nothing leaves without being logged. All right. Carolyn returned the next Thursday and spent 3 hours sorting invoices by date. She found no new ownership claim and no hidden instruction. What she found was ordinary evidence of Ronald paying taxes, buying plywood, and postponing larger work when family expenses increased. At lunchtime, she opened the bakery box she had brought again. "I remembered Norman can't eat the hard rolls," she said. Norman accepted a soft bun without thanking her too warmly. Carolyn continued helping twice a month. Teresa never gave her an unrestricted key. Carolyn never asked for one. Gary stayed away until the rear porch was nearly finished. He called Teresa from the curb. "Can I come in?" "You can." "Is Norman there?" "Yes." Gary entered through the front door and looked up at the restored transom. The original glass had been cleaned and reset in its repaired frame. He followed Teresa to room 12. His first visit lasted less than 10 minutes. "I should have looked," he said. "Yes. I mean, before the settlement. I know what you mean." He stood beside the blanket chest. "I thought Dad kept this building because he couldn't let things go. Sometimes that was true. Were you going to give me anything if I hadn't asked?" "No." Gary nodded as if he had expected the answer, but needed to hear it in the room. "I'm still in trouble financially," he said. "I'm sorry. You're not going to help. Not with money." He looked toward her. "Then with what?" "I can give you the number of the debt advisor I used when I planned the Maple House budget. You can decide whether to call." Gary's disappointment was plain. So was the effort it took not to turn that disappointment into blame. "Send it," he said. He called the advisor. Teresa learned that from Carolyn, not from Gary. Several weeks later, he came back for one of Norman's Saturday work sessions. The original transom frame needed a final coat of paint. Norman handed Gary a scraper and showed him how to protect the glass. Gary worked for most of the morning. He did not mention the museum money. Before leaving, he cleaned the scraper and returned it to the correct drawer. That did not restore him to Teresa's daily life. It did show he could enter Maple House without trying to own the next decision. The final occupancy inspection took place on a cold morning near the end of the year. The inspector tested alarms, measured doorways, checked railings, and ran water in every completed bathroom. Room 9 and Room 10 remained closed for later work. 6 rooms were ready for lodging, including 2 accessible rooms on the first floor. In the kitchen, he checked the fire extinguisher tag and signed the approval. "You can occupy the completed rooms," he said. "Closed areas remain restricted." Teresa read the paper before thanking him. That afternoon, she removed the unfit for occupancy notice from the front door. She did not throw it away. She filed it with the first repair order, the roof invoices, and the $5 receipt. The first resident arrived the following Monday. Marion Cole was a retired cafeteria worker who needed a room for several months after the building she rented was sold. She carried 2 suitcases, a box of kitchen things, and a small radio wrapped in a towel. Teresa showed her room 6. The walls were soft white. The window opened easily. A reading lamp stood beside the bed, and 2 shelves had been mounted low enough to reach without stretching. "What's the weekly rate again?" Marion asked. Teresa told her. "That includes heat and use of the kitchen and laundry. Any rules about visitors?" "They sign in. Quiet hours start at 10. This is your room, so nobody enters without notice unless there's an emergency." Marion tested the lock from inside. "Good," she said. Teresa handed her the key. By spring, 4 rooms were occupied. Residents made their own breakfasts and shared dinner twice a week. Teresa kept accounts at the room 12 writing desk for 1 hour each morning, then returned downstairs before visitors arrived. The old laundry area became Norman's workshop. He chose the bench height himself. On Saturdays, he taught small repair sessions for older adults who wanted to mend drawers, replace chair seats, or learn which jobs required a professional. He began every session by making people put on eye protection. No exceptions for age or vanity, he said. Teresa managed registration from the kitchen. She charged enough to replace materials and keep the lights on. Carolyn attended one session and repaired a loose hinge on her own kitchen cabinet. Gary came twice. Neither was given special access, and neither expected it. Room 12 remained part of the house, not a vault. Museum visitors came by appointment. Residents used the 2 retained chairs during quiet afternoons. Nobody slept there, just as nobody had when Maple House first opened. Teresa sometimes sat at Ronald's desk after dinner and read through his records. She still wished he had explained himself while alive. Preserved furniture did not excuse silence, and a valuable room did not repair 25 years of letting trust papers speak for him. She could miss him without turning every choice he made into kindness. The house no longer required that confusion from her. If stories about reclaiming dignity after family abandonment matter to you, subscribe and return for the next inheritance story. One evening in early autumn, Teresa finished the accounts and locked the office. Marion was making tea in the kitchen. A radio played softly in room 6. From the workshop came the smell of fresh-cut pine, though Norman had gone home an hour earlier. Carolyn had left a message asking whether Thursday still worked for invoice sorting. Gary had sent a photograph of a chair joint he wanted Norman to inspect. Teresa answered both when she was ready. She walked upstairs and opened room 12 for the evening. The mirror caught the last light from the west windows. Ronald's photograph rested beside the old boarding ledgers, and the 2 chairs faced the hall. Downstairs, someone laughed as the kettle began to whistle. A resident's key turned in the front lock. Footsteps crossed the entry and moved toward the warm kitchen. Teresa checked that the stair rail was clear, then reached for the row of switches beside the restored doorway. Teresa turned on the warm hall lights as restored room. 12 stood open to the inhabited house.